level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are not
President,
strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 10 o'clock, and whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, always very lovely to have your company, on this lovely summery day out there. It's like for you. I'm going on about the weather a lot at the moment because I'm British. It's the law. Anyway, an awful lot to talk about today. I mean, I have to say, I had planning the show yesterday, plenty to talk about today already, and then a whole load of news stories have filled their boots with us. We're going to be talking a bit about inflation because, let's face it, cost of living is still one of the key issues for us. Inflation has risen to 3.5% in April from 2.6% in March. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. And it's all thanks to rising energy bills, water bills and council tax bills. Who's that down to? Oh, Labour. Hi. Thanks very much for that, guys. Plus Boris Johnson. You might remember him. He was Prime Minister of this country for some time. Had the power to change lots of things. But he said Britain is becoming a police state under Labour. He spoke out after Lucy Connolly lost an appeal against her 31-month sentence yesterday for an online rant about migrants on the day of the Southport attacks. Is he really the man to talk about that issue? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in particular. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Give you more details in a moment. Plus, as we're just discussing with Mike Graham, taxpayers have forked out thousands of pounds to house a dog that crossed the channel with its illegal immigrant owner in a pack dinghy. The German Shepherd has now spent at least 4 months in quarantine at taxpayers' expense. That will be an absolute fortune that we are paying for. Until when? I wonder. Plus, it's been revealed that Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner sent a secret memo to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, pushing for a new tax raid on savers. Rayner proposed 8 different tax increases, including reinstating the pension lifetime allowance and £1 million and changing dividend taxes. She is not a woman who understands private business, is she? Plus, Britain's equality regulator has said that hospitals, sports clubs and leisure centres will be allowed to request birth certificates from trans trans-identifying people to ensure that single-sex services are protected. So if you claim you're a woman but you don't look like a woman, you're going to go into a woman's changing room, you're going to have to prove it. I'm not quite sure, though, how birth certificate's going to work there, because you can have, under your gender recognition certificate, a new birth certificate that says you are the sex that you actually aren't. So we'll be talking about that and plenty more besides. Joining me for the chat today, I am always delighted to say, is a former Conservative government advisor, but honestly, she's nice, really, Claire Pissell. Very good morning to you.
Good morning. When
I describe you as that, I always think it's sort of, people go, oh,
yes.
I mean, Conservatives aren't doing very well in the polls right now. I'm not sure it's a good billing for you, but you know her well as a woman speaking great sense on many, many different topics. We have an awful lot to talk about. Let's get straight to it. First of all, I want to talk about inflation, and then we're going to get to Boris Johnson on our police state. Inflation has gone up from 2.6% last month, or the month before. Latest figures are for April, to 3.5%. It's largely down to household bills going up, because it's all part of our basket of expenditure. Your energy bill's gone up, your water bills have gone up, council tax gone up by 5% for most people. I mean, at the end of the day, the Tories left a mess. No one's denying that. But Labour Party said they were going to make our energy bills £300 a year cheaper. They've gone up, I think, by about £300. Water bills, OK, that's an ongoing, long-standing issue, but they are still going up. Council tax going up, I say 5%. That's a lot of 5% on, on your sort of, £1,600, £2,000 council bill. That's a lot of money. And again, you have no choice. You can't say, well, I'll buy less at the supermarket because prices are going up. I'll turn the heating down a bit because I won't have it on as much because the prices, the energy is going up. You have to pay your council tax bill. This is not good. Labour are trying to put a spin on it, saying, oh, well, we're not happy about this, but, things are better and it's going to take us a while to sort the economy out. How long is that going to fly, that argument?
Well, I don't think it flies very well with the public anyway to say, oh, you have to wait a bit longer, trust us, we're doing our best. Because I think the public are looking at what's coming out of their bank accounts on a monthly basis and saying,
they can see it.
How long is not very long? Because whatever you are looking at, your monthly income is relatively going to stay the same for the majority of people. They aren't going to have massive increases in a wage, and all of these costs, and it's not just the ones you've mentioned, but it's also things like broadband, mobile phones.
I couldn't believe it when I got, you're getting all these notices like on your phone company. Oh, by the way, extra tenner on your phone bill a month.
For what? So I looked at my mobile phone. It's like I do the same thing with it. They offer me the same service. The internet's not great sometimes because I live in the countryside, but I have to now pay 3% more but for nothing. So you've got all of that. You've got the food increases. You've got petrol increases. So for the Labour government to say they're here, it is. They're here for the working people. Well, are they? How about stripping away the net zero? Because then our energy bills might well come down.
I mean, and again, this has been totally debunked, the idea that, well, our high energy bills now are entirely due to, the gas market. No, they're not. They're not. Because if they were, then energy bills would be just as high in America, and they're not. It's virtually all of that extra increase is actually down to, the extra money we spend is down to all basically all the different surcharges and all the subsidising of net zero policies, which are just making us poorer and making our energy more expensive in the first place. Genuinely, I've used this word before, I'll use it again, it's correct use, insane policies. When you do something that mad, insanity is the answer. It's not going to go down very well. It probably explains an awful lot about the polling, and we'll get to that in a few moments. But let's also talk about, the answer to the problems that we've got, apparently, according to Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, is that we should have a tax raid on savers. This is real sort of Corbynista stuff, which is people are really struggling in the middle classes and the working classes at the bottom of the pile. People on wealth, people are struggling really. And when you get food prices and energy prices and council taxes, like when they go up, that massively hits a bigger chunk of people who are on average and normal and low earnings. The actual money they've got to spend, they haven't got their spare little luxury spending. They don't have to cancel their second ski holiday. You know what I mean? No, but I mean that's the reality. But it is. And the answer is, as it always was under Corbyn, under the left Labour Party, the answer is always tax the rich more. And those horrible people over there who earn all the money at the expense of everyone else, they seem to think. She's come up with a whole load of different tax raises, eight different kinds. And she wrote about them in a secret memo to Rachel Reeves back in March, which has now emerged. Clearly clearly being put out by Rachel. I mean, I'm assuming by Angela Rayner's people. Well, I think by Angela Rayner's people to say, look, we're not in favour of this. Apparently, she is very unhappy about having to publicly defend Treasury spending cuts, because the idea is the finances don't add up. £22 billion back hole and all that nonsense, and basically you can't borrow anymore, well, you can't put taxes up anymore, you've got to national insurance rise on jobs, basically going to have to cut back on spending. That is going to upset a lot of Labour voters and, well, basically people on the payroll, whether it's welfare or people in the public sector. And so she's proposing tax rises of £3 to £4 billion a year, could be more. Things like people who are on the additional rate of income tax, so the highest rate of income tax, basically paying, not getting the pensions lifetime allowance they've been previously getting, changing dividends taxes, higher corporation tax level for the banks, all of this stuff. I mean, very popular with Labour voters, a complete and utter lack of understanding of how the private sector works and the motivations for people who start businesses, create jobs, take people off welfare, creating jobs who then pay tax by getting dividends. They don't understand why that dividend tax is lower than PAYE. It's because of the risk. Yes. When you leave a job to then start your own business, you often don't pay yourself for a year or two. I've seen so many friends and family do that, and then
their entire life is building it up.
And also, by the way, if things go wrong, you're the one who doesn't get paid, but your employees do. But you get the dividend, you get a lower rate of tax for a reason on that, because of that entrepreneurial risk. But she doesn't understand any of that. She's been in the public sector all her life.
But she also doesn't understand that by taxing savers, which is another one of her super ideas, it's just a tax on sensible people. So if you've been sensible and you've managed to squirrel away a small amount of money, Angela Rayner's going to come for it. So not only that, she's looking at
got more than
pensioners.
£1 million.
Yeah.
But by the way, former Director of Public Prosecutions, who had an Act of Parliament to actually protect his pension, Keir Starmer, I believe we know him now as the Prime Minister, he's got more than £1 million in his pension.
Precisely. I wonder how happy he is about that. But it is the pensioners who are going to take the brunt of this. So if you're looking at trying to shore up your vote base, don't irritate the pensioners. You've already taken away their winter fuel allowance. There's 1 million more pensioners this year who are in the 40% tax bracket due to the fiscal drag. So 2 million
they
more
haven't got
pensioners.
richer.
They haven't. 2 million more are paying income tax at the higher level.
Yeah, I mean, at the higher level, again. Look, but there is a generation, and my parents are very much that generation, who came from, working class homes, grammar school, university, done very well, bought homes for 3 pence, which then become worth money. I mean, good on them. They work very hard for everything they've done, but they are the generation that got all the benefits that the welfare, not the welfare state, but that the state provided. And the benefits of house price rises, which an awful lot of the younger generation don't get. But that's not their fault. I mean, penalising pensioners who've worked hard and done well seems to me to be a rather strange thing, because otherwise, why would people bother to do well other than, people want to save for their retirement and save, for instance, to help their children in the future.
That's right. So she's taking all the aspiration away from people. So anybody that wants to, as you say, be an entrepreneur and have that risk of setting up a business and employing people, they're going to be taxed to high heaven. Pensioners who've managed to scrimp and save, and yes, they have benefited from slightly lower house prices when they were buying. But again, they were aspirational. They wanted their own house. They built a family and they saved for their future.
They're not on the council house list.
No. They're not causing us a burden.
It's got to be an incentive. It's got to be an incentive. I know lots of people who actually get help from their parents, who again of that generation, who are able to help them with things like childcare. So that they can go to work and pay taxes. I mean, again, these things just are totally not understood, aren't they? Let's talk about this in the context of where we are in terms of our this country right now, because a lot of anger over the cost of living. There's been a lot of anger over immigration. That story's in the news again. Yet again, we've got an Iraqi asylum seeker staying in Britain, despite telling the judge, I don't have a real reason to be here. Give me some time, I'll make one up. He dropped, didn't have his ID document, and of course he didn't. And also a story about an asylum seeker's dog, front page of the Sun today, in quarantine for many months at taxpayers' expense, came over in a dinghy. It's a German Shepherd. I'm assuming we can return him to Germany at some point. I mean, that's his heritage. That's all I'm saying. These mad stories. But so we know we've got the economy, we've got immigration. We have, NHS is still a big issue, but we've also got the issue now of, I suppose, culture and freedom of speech and two-tier gear. Keir is a really big thing now. And after that appeal by Lucy Connolly yesterday was lost against her 31-month sentence for a tweet she wrote immediately after, just within hours of the Southport attacks last year, Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, has said some extraordinary things, bearing in mind Lucy Connolly has been backed by the likes of Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick and many, many others, basically arguing that, yeah, what she wrote was horrible, but they don't think that she should be behind bars, and certainly not for 31 months. Just to remind you of her tweet. I was reading out yesterday, and I didn't read out the full tweet each time, but I still think it's worth knowing. Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bees. Can't read out those words, for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it. Often we kind of ignore the bit saying, while you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will have to endure. Now, part of that was the fact that she, of course, had lost a child herself, and therefore young children being killed would particularly be even more heartbreaking for her and visceral for her than even for most of us. Horrible tweet. I don't like it. Lucy, those words were reasonably could be read that you were racist. However, don't think she should have got away for 31 months. I think a caution would have been enough. I don't want people writing stuff like that. She'd already taken it down. People have done and said far worse things and no action whatsoever. But Boris Johnson has blasted the judgment as crazy and inhuman. And he said, Starmer's Britain is losing its reputation for free speech and turning into a police state where we must all learn to fear the knock on the door simply for something we say. The UK police are now making over 10,000 arrests every year for online comment, more than the police in Russia itself. And this judgment is yet another propaganda gift for Vladimir Putin. I've got some words to say about this with Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, have you forgotten all that time when you were Prime Minister of this country, when, by the way, you locked us in our homes for 23 hours a day? You encouraged us to spy on our neighbours. You authorised the monitoring and the attempted censoring of online free speech by scientists of national, international standing at Oxford University and elsewhere, of journalists and even some of your own MPs. And little old me as well. I know you did it because I've won a formal apology from your government for having done that. You even passed my information on to a counter-terrorism unit in the United States. But yeah, now Keir Starmer's turning Britain into a police state. I think, Boris Johnson, you are suffering from amnesia because you literally turned us into a police state during COVID. And anyone who says, well, times were different, it was a pandemic, well, how about this? Non-crime hate incidents, they've been around since 2014, under the Tories. Boris Johnson was in power for a couple of years. Did he do anything to stop the rise of non-crime hate incidents? Not at all. They actually increased under him. Non-crime hate incidents where people get a knock on the door from the police, get a police record effectively for doing nothing wrong, certainly not a crime, the clue's in the name, but simply for saying something that someone else might perceive as being hurty. Boris Johnson, if anyone turned this country into a police state, undermined freedom of speech, undermined our civil society more than, frankly, anyone else in our history, it is you. How dare you say this? How dare you claim that this is a problem under Keir Starmer when it was a problem under your government and the government before and the government before that, and you did absolutely nothing to stop it. Indeed, you made it worse. Hang your head in shame once again. Oh yeah, comb your hair as well. Claire Pearce, what do you make of this?
I'm not sure I can add to that. I mean, a fantastic roundup of all of the things that Boris Johnson has done that he has conveniently forgotten about. Oh, no. I'm sure that we could have an entire programme on the wrongs of Boris Johnson. But this was a man who got the fixed penalty notice himself. So his own laws that he put in fined him. Yeah,
that was just for the cake thing. It wasn't for all the drunken parties. Not a single one of the drunken parties that happened under his watch, in his building.
But he locked us in our homes. He made councils lock up swings so kids couldn't play because they would get a virus in the outside, in the fresh air. I think I don't need to hear from Boris Johnson ever again. I really, really don't.
I'm still amazed at the number of people who thinks he's the great white hope. He's the answer to the Tories.
He's the splash on a newspaper because he opens his mouth. Why?
He's still a big character. I know lots of people. I've got colleagues who just absolutely love him. He's busted flush. He did it when it came to everyone think, he was a libertarian. He's not. He's literally the opposite of a libertarian. He doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't even believe in Brexit. He believes in nothing but Boris Johnson. He's a fraud. He is a fake. I don't understand how much do you need to see of this man to not know this and to realise this. I'd love to hear from you though. You may disagree with me. I know a lot of people go, oh no, Boris Johnson, if only we had him back, it would be great. He says Britain is turning into a police state under Labour. This is after Lucy Connolly lost her appeal against her 31-month prison sentence for that tweet. What is your reaction to that? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Love to hear your thoughts on that Lucy Connolly case as well. We discussed that a lot on air yesterday. Also, tax raids from Angela Rayner, inflation. I also do want to hear from you about another man who's very much the subject of my ire today, and that is the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. He announced sanctions against members of the Israeli government yesterday. They've also announced an end to trade talks with Israel over what he has called, in his words, the monstrous and intolerable military expansion in Gaza and the blockade of aid in Gaza, even though aid is now, we understand, going to be going in. My issue here is I don't want any innocent civilian, let alone a child, to die in Gaza. You don't. I don't think anyone. I don't think Netanyahu does. I don't think anyone does. Who's a moral human being. However, if a terrorist group had entered our country, had massacred families, burnt them alive, had raped and tortured women, strangled children, had taken hostage hundreds of our fellow citizens, refused to hand them back while they were tortured and kept in tunnels underground and starved. What would we be doing right now? And if we were taking on that enemy, and that enemy, by the way, says they want to do it again and they would do it every single day if they got the opportunity. Hamas leadership has actually said that. What's left of their leadership, because Israel keeps taking them out. They are refusing to hand the hostages back unless when forced to come to the table. They are still using their own civilians as human shields. That is the reason why innocent civilians die. They're not man enough to just put on a uniform and fight the IDF woman and man to woman. No, they hide behind young children under hospitals, in schools, under the refugee tents. That's what they do. That's their choice. They actively want civilians to die because they know it looks fantastic on the BBC News in the evening. And then people like David Lammy feel pressured to say, oh, Israel's the baddie. If that was us, and Israel or any other state said to us, no, you have to give aid to the people among whom the terrorists are hiding. You have to stop striking missiles against them because there might be a civilian nearby where the terror leaders are plotting their next attack on your country. What do you think our reaction would be, Claire?
Our reaction would be an absolute outrage. Why would you ever allow that? But I suspect that a Labour government would follow along those lines, and that's what I find really frightening. You have a foreign secretary who is actively working against a democratic state.
The only democratic state in the Middle East.
Exactly, in favour of a terrorist organisation.
That's my thing. It's really, really simple. Whose side are you on?
Yes.
It's just you're on the side of the democratic nation state that is the victim of a terrible atrocity, and you are trying to destroy the terror organisation that said they would do it again. Or are you on the side of the terror organisation? So it's very interesting that Hamas actually issued a statement in which they thanked David Lammy and the British government for their stance on this issue.
I would be so embarrassed.
What does that tell you? What does that tell you?
I would just be beside myself if I had any praise from a terrorist organisation. No, they need to be annihilated, and that's it. And we should be supporting Israel. It doesn't mean that you cannot criticise some of the actions taken. You actually, you should do that.
There'll be individual policies and individual soldiers who do wrong.
Precisely. But we need to not issue sanctions against individuals. It's just ridiculous. What is it going to achieve apart from giving Hamas
it's virtue signalling, giving Hamas more power and undermining Israel, but also it's a sop. It's a sop to the Muslim activists and Islamist activists in this country as well. That's what it is. They're more afraid about losing that vote than they are about doing the right thing. And by the way, we should always do both the moral right thing in foreign affairs, but we should also do what's in our national interest. Being on the side of the only democracy in the Middle East, our staunch ally, standing up against Islamist fascism, is absolutely in our national interest. 10:25 is the time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Taking on all comers quite happily today. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Whether you want to talk about Boris Johnson, when you talk about the Lisa Connolly case, you want to talk about inflation, you want to talk about David Lammy. I mean, frankly, I would rather he spent the rest of his life just sitting in the back of a French taxi driver, leaving mess and not paying his taxi fare. That would be a much better contribution to the world and certainly to international affairs than what he's doing right now. Do give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk.
What's so extraordinary about it is that what we would think of, I think, what anyone would think of as more serious offences, receive lower sentences. So some people who actually were convicted, pleaded guilty to participating in the riots last summer, received significantly lower sentences. People convicted for being members of rape gangs for offences like having sex with child prostitutes have been convicted for less than 2.5 years.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Coming up to 10:28, lots of top guests coming throughout the show. We're going to be talking more about Israel with Jake Wallace-Simons. We're also going to be talking with James Mathewson, your friend of mine. You always get very upset when he's on. He's a jolly nice chap. Former Labour Party spokesman James Mathewson about those, inflation rises and the small matter of more tax rates, which are being suggested by the Deputy Prime Minister. Apparently not keen is the Chancellor, but we'll talk about that in just a couple of moments. First up, though, let's get to your call. So 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Stephen is in Burnley and wants to have his say after Boris Johnson said Britain is turning into a police state after Lucy Connolly lost her appeal against that 31-month sentence for a pretty nasty tweet after the Southport attack. What do you want to say, Stephen?
Well, it's just the fact that you spent most of the time just talking about Boris Johnson. I mean, you should have been, I thought, going after Starmer and his start for sort of like police state has turned us into a tweet and talk police.
Well, the reason I pointed out was that it didn't start under Starmer.
Well, I always admired you since watching on Newsnight years ago and standing on your own against everybody else. But
that's the usual form.
Boris Johnson, you really need to leave the guy alone.
Well, I only mention him because he puts himself on the front page of papers making these comments. I just think it's a bit rich for a former Prime Minister to criticise what's going on now when he did everything to push that agenda and nothing to stop it. I just think it's hypocritical at best.
Well, I agree with you on that, but it was COVID. It was different.
No, I'm saying on every other area, he's not. Everyone thinks he's this libertarian, he's a liberal. He's not. He absolutely. When he was actually in office, he didn't do anything to do that. Non-crime hate incidents, they exploded under Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I know he did let us down. I'd never vote for him again. Definitely, but I just think. It was 5 years ago.
Well, he only left office 3 years ago, and he still apparently thinks he's going to come back into office. But OK, let's talk about the Lucy Connolly case then, because obviously this is a concern, and I've quite a big debate with. I mean, ongoing just before I came on air actually with friends of mine and those who support him. Got Alison Pearson, who's written fantastic pieces in the Telegraph, and has really changed my mind about the Lucy Connolly case. I have to say, in terms of I think a lot of the reporting about her was actually very misleading in terms of what kind of woman she was and who she is as a person. Do you think that she should have been punished at all for what she wrote? Do you think what she wrote was wrong?
I think you were right when you said she possibly should have got a caution or whatever, but a fine. But no, not a custodial sentence. That's way over the top.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I was like, yeah. I mean, the reporting at the time suggested this was a number of racist tweets, and when you actually saw what she'd written, they weren't racist tweets. And when you knew the context and the mitigating circumstances, were you surprised that the appeal court didn't let her out?
Yeah, I thought they're bound to. I just couldn't believe it.
But is that quite telling? I mean,
everybody else.
It ties in, doesn't it, with the idea of like two-tier justice? I mean, it is extraordinary that. The men who drove a car down very, very near to my home, waving Palestinian flags a few years ago, shouting, "We're going to rape your wives and daughters," to local Jewish people. It's a very strong Jewish area. They on video, they did it in person, a clear, blatant threat to women and children, and no charges have ever been brought against them.
Two-tier. Two-tier all over.
Yeah, I mean, maybe as someone's pointing out on social media yesterday, maybe if Lucy Connolly had just targeted any of her hatred in that tweet towards or anger towards Jewish people, she wouldn't be in prison now.
Yep.
Stephen, thank you for your call. Appreciate that. Claire Pierce was with me. Banging on too much about Boris. It was years ago. Get over it. What do you say?
No, Boris Johnson puts himself as the answer to all evils on the front of newspapers and believes that we need to hear his thoughts. So he needs to be brought out and called out on it.
She's a Conservative, just so you say it, just so you know, Steve. Another Claire is on the line. Claire is in the Wirral, and she wants to talk about the Lucy Connolly case. Good morning to you, Claire.
Good morning, Julia, and good morning, Claire. I'd like to say, that the radical establishment and Starmer and the far left think that Lucy Connolly should have been locked up. Why? Because she has to be made an example of, and also they think she's a white racist. Now, there's an elephant in the room here, and we never talk about other kinds of racism. So, she's got to be made an example of course. And also, Starmer is frightened that there's going to be civil unrest on the streets. So she's got to be kept locked up, because she's high priority.
Surely the argument is that actually, if you're worried about unrest on the streets, I mean, who are you worried about the unrest from? The supposed far right, who are behind those riots in after Southport? Because surely that would argue for her to be released, no?
No, I mean, they weren't far right. That's
no, of course
the problem,
not.
Isn't it? It's just the public, and it was the outrage of the public about what's happening in this country and about what happened in Southport. And I'm quite close here where I live to Southport. Yeah. But really, she's a white racist.
That's why.
She's white. But what about honour killings, Julia? And what about the Pakistani rape gangs? Are they not racist? They are the elephants in the room.
Yeah, well, the honour killings are against people of their own family. So but that's the thing. Of course, there's racism in every single race. There is a racism against different groups. I mean, again, anyone paying attention would know that. That's absolutely the case. Claire, really interesting point. Thank you very much. Look, she was targeted because she's white, Claire.
It does feel like that. What she said was abhorrent. She deleted the tweet. I think that she needed a slap on the wrist. I don't think you need to jail somebody for that when there is worse going on out there.
And again, I do think the reporting at the time, and again, I wasn't in the court. I thought it was very misleading.
Yes, it was.
And when I read Alison Pearson's piece, which had a lot more detail in it a few weeks ago, actually, I think it changed a lot of people's minds. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this. 0344 499 1000. Get in touch, whether it's about Israel and David Lammy, whether it's about Angela Rayner and tax raids, whether it's about inflation, Lucy Connolly, Boris Johnson, you name it, get in touch. 0344 499 1000. Up next, we are going to talk to the Labour Party former spokesman, that's James Matthewson, about a lot of those topics. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thanks so much for joining me. 10:36 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Claire Pearsall's still with me, and delighted to be joined now by James Matthewson. He's a former spokesman for the Labour Party. A very, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Lots to talk about today. Should we talk about inflation, first of all, because that will be at the front of a lot of people's minds facing their bills. Inflation has risen from 2.6% in March up to 3.5% in April. Largely, we understand, down to household bills. So it's the energy bills going up, it's your water bills, council tax bills on average about 5% most parts of the country. Is this all down to Labour policy? Is inflation their fault?
I always find it fascinating, and this is, by the way, this isn't a party political point of view. I always find it fascinating when people on the left or the Democrats in America or the Labour Party do the same here. But when you blame one particular government for the state of the economy, when obviously there's so many mitigating factors and knock-on effects, because policies take a long time to come into action, unless it's, Liz Truss's mini budget, let's be honest, there's very few things that have an immediate shocking effect. So, of course, there's multiple things, but I don't think that Rachel Reeves has helped herself in this situation with the way that she's approached the economy and the way she's trying to handle it. She's trying to have her cake and eat it with regard to some policies and the way that she presents herself. And I just don't think it's adhering to any particular direction or ideological kind of vision for the economy as a whole. And as a result, she's got herself in this situation where she's trying to play fiscal responsibility, but also trying to do a bit of Keynesian economics and trying to do investment at the same time. It's just not working. Really,
she hasn't got the money for it. But the key thing is, a lot of people are saying, like, OK, you could understand why you need to pay for stuff. You might have to put some taxes up. You put taxes up on jobs, national insurance, employers' contributions going up. That's going to have the opposite effect on the economy. But, the energy bills, an awful lot, we were told, were we not, that energy bills were going to come down by £300 a year. They've gone up by that amount. Large part of that increase is, I'm afraid, the analysis is very clear, down to all the subsidies of fossil fuels and all the extras there. these are government policies. Now, a lot of it put in place by the last set of Tory governments, absolutely. But water bills, again, that's a long-standing issue. I don't necessarily blame the government for that. But council tax bills going up, again, that's down to the amount of things that we require councils to do and the amount of funding they get from central government. I mean, you guys have been in office for less than a year, but I'm wondering how long you can blame everything on the last lot for.
You're absolutely right. And to be clear, they're not my guys. I'm not even a member of the party anymore.
You're not?
Well, no, I'm not. I wouldn't be at the moment. I'm so disenfranchised with Keir Starmer. But at the same time, there are things they could be doing. Real Labour things that they could be doing with regard to the water companies, the energy companies. These water companies posting profits that are absolutely despicable year after year when people are paying, through their nose for water bills. It just doesn't make sense to me. I joined the Labour Party because there was a clear vision and kind of value at the core of things and how they handled economics, as I'm sure Claire did with the Tories, and that's the way you kind of view it. But this is so out of kilter with anything you would expect the Labour Party
This is the interesting thing, because Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, seem to be upsetting everyone sort of on the centre and the right, certainly judging by the polls, but not pleasing the left. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, certainly hopes to please the left. There's been the leaking of a document. Who are we kidding? It's obviously come from Angela Rayner's office. The Deputy Prime Minister wrote a memo to the Chancellor. Angela Rayner, as we know, I'm sure, a highly trained economist, probably as highly trained and experienced as the actual Chancellor probably is. She probably spent more years as an economist at a bank than Rachel Reeves did. But she's pushing for a tax raid on savers. That's how the Telegraph, you've seen the document, are putting it. They say that she's proposed 8 different tax increases. She also wants to reinstate the pensions lifetime allowance for high earners. You've got £1 million. After that, you don't get your extra allowances. Changing dividend taxes, making them higher. New raids on the million people who pay the additional rate of income tax, so the top earners, and a higher corporation tax level for the banks. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn could have written this memo and it would have been very popular. I imagine it would go down very well indeed with a lot of backbench Labour MPs and indeed Labour voters. Would it be enough to bring you back?
It's the kind of policy that I'd like to see, Julia.
Tax the rich, tax that lot over there.
Yeah, the things that we disagree on, but that's the Labour Party, right? That's why a lot of people, vote Conservative, because they don't believe in Labour policies. However, the problem here is that this hasn't come from Angela Rayner. This has come from the trade unions, because Angela is the voice, or one of the remaining voices, now that the likes of Louise Haig's gone, at the cabinet table, who represents the trade union movement. That is her tradition. The Labour Party's made up of what we call different traditions, people who come from different sides of the party. Angela came through the same tradition I did, which was the trade unions, which is why you may mock her for not having a economics degree or whatever, but similar to me...
I'd never mock anyone for not having an economics degree.
Similar to me, she doesn't have any qualifications, and she came through the trade union movement, which got people who were working real jobs into politics. So that's her tradition, but she's giving a voice to those
she is. However, she has also always been in the public sector and perhaps doesn't, like an awful lot of your front bench, understand anything about how private business work. We're seeing more and more, got billionaires have left the country, millionaires leaving every few minutes this country. But at the end of the day, taxing the rich more, taxing those people over there a lot more to pay for everything. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in any other country.
I don't think the private sector is short of voices that are standing up for it, put it that way.
Well, they're standing up for it, but at the end of the day, any country that does instigate these sort of higher taxes do actually see the rich people. I mean, they are very able to just up sticks and move to their other house somewhere else and take up residency there. If we put tax there, I just think this is the Corbynista politics.
I'm sick of being blackmailed by rich people, Julia, as a country.
But that's implying that they're not paying tax at all. The top 1% of earners in this country pay about 30% of all tax in this country. I think they're paying their fair share.
Yes, but when you look at that comparison to what it costs to live and what the rest of working people are paying and how much percentage of the cost working people have to spend on tax just to get their bins emptied, and how much that costs them with regards to the cost of living, then it doesn't impact rich people.
No, of course, when you're richer, it doesn't impact you more. Of course it doesn't. But most of the people who are well off in this country are well off because they haven't inherited it. They've worked really hard and they've done well. Now, I know there are lots of people who work very hard but don't end up doing well. I get that. But why do you want to sort of feel like in some way they've done something bad and they should be punished when they're trying to save for their future, save for their family's future?
It's not punishment, it's society. And I know there's a lot of people...
But they're already paying a lot of tax.
A lot of people who want us to move away from society. This is the world that we're in, okay? Costs are up. People are paying through the nose for everything.
What percentage tax should well-off people pay?
But it's not for me to
No, I'm asking your opinion. You left the Labour Party because you weren't happy with the policies. They're not lefty enough for you. What percentage? I mean, François Hollande got into became the French president. He instigated a 70% tax on the well-off, and basically people just left the country the next day. So what percentage do you think would be about right?
But I've already told you that I'm not an economist and I'm not going to pretend to be. So I'm not going to throw figures about, at the same time.
But it should be higher than 45% plus national insurance.
My point of view
is over 50%.
Then I think the recouping of the money and where money is claimed from the Treasury and brought into the Treasury from is not right and not done in the right direction.
The recouping of the money, it's not the state's money, it's people's private money, first of all.
I get that, Julia, but
wouldn't it be better to get all those people who are not working?
We've had this debate before. If you believe in society, then unfortunately these are the costs that come with.
I absolutely think that rich people should pay more tax than poorer people and that people should contribute. But I also think people have a moral duty to contribute, to work and contribute, no matter what their circumstances are, if they're able to work. What about getting the roughly 5 million people of working age who are not working into work?
Your priority, as always, is to go after those with very little. My priority...
Well, they've got very little because they're not working. They'd have more if they worked.
I do not care their circumstances, Julia. If they have very little, I'm not going to target them when I could be targeting...
But you could help them not to have very little by insisting they got a job. That would make their lives better. That'd be better for their physical health, mental health, self-respect, better for their kids, better for society. You believe in society. Right. Everyone being a net contributor who can be, or contributor, is surely a good thing for society.
That is not, I believe, the majority view towards people on benefits.
I hate to tell you, I think the polling shows that it is, actually.
The polling, you can find polling in different directions.
Oh, so your polling is the right polling and my polling is the wrong polling?
No.
Well, that's what you just basically said.
If I can show a poll that's the opposite of the poll you show...
Well, then, so when you say that's not the majority view, you're presumably basing that on a poll or just people you know?
No, I'm just saying, I do not believe that in the conservative media and the bubble that you sit in...
I don't sit in a conservative media bubble at all, mate. You know nothing about my life, honestly.
Julia, your viewers and your listeners are some of the most heinously right-wing people. When I do your show, I need to tell you this right now, when I do your show, the emails that I receive afterwards, the woman who just called into you before, who's crying
about... You have your email?
As
I don't have your email.
Other kinds of racists. These are not normal people. These are people on the fringes, on the extreme side of politics. And the irony is, of course, they're all bothered about the term far right, but they don't realise that if they just did a political compass test online, it's very easy to do and free, they would find most of their beliefs are to the far right of politics.
You think that expecting not to have two-tier justice, expecting people to work if they can, not having open borders, deporting illegal migrants. You think that is all far right, don't you?
No, I believe a constant fear of immigration and xenophobia and white nationalism.
White nationalism now?
Yeah, white nationalism. Because if you grill down with these people, Julia, I've been on doorsteps. Have you gone and knocked on doors?
Yeah, I have.
From these people, they are bothered about less and less white faces in their communities.
They're bothered about a load of people come to the country who don't share any of the values, don't share any of the culture.
They say they're losing English culture. What the hell is English culture?
Well, there's your problem. I know what English culture is.
Well, I'm English, and I don't know what English culture is.
How do you not know what... It's sense of fair play. It's our democratic values. It's equality. It's freedom of speech. That is such a big part of English/British culture. I think that is kind of in our DNA, actually. Yeah.
Because Pakistanis and Indians famously don't do fair play. It just makes.
Sorry, are you under any illusion about how politics is run in both India and Pakistan? Are you under an illusion about the level of corruption involved in both of those countries' political systems?
The point is that a lot of these people are absolutely deluded, and if you speak to them and you drill down in it,
And they're all heinous, far right, and racist, as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, because if you believe in policies and politics that are to the right and to the extreme right of politics,
extreme right. I hate to tell you, most Labour voters would like a limit on mass immigration. Yes. And I think 85% of the public would like it to be, I think, well under 100,000 people in the low tens of thousands or zero. But so is 85% of the country heinous, right-wing and xenophobic and racist?
Because you're doing what you always do, which is conflate anybody, trying to make it sound like I think anybody who has a concern about immigration
Well, that's what you said, basically.
No, it is not. I've said the people who are bothered, who are white nationalists, who are bothered about the colour of people's skin and culture and losing culture somehow, that is a different side.
Some people are bothered about the skin colour, and I believe that is racism. I am not bothered about the skin colour at all. So does that? I share a lot of the views that you just talked about. Does that make me racist and heinous and far right?
It makes you to the far right of British politics.
The far right.
Google your name, you'll find that that's what your name is.
Oh, so if people call me far right, then I must be far right.
Have you ever done a political compass test?
No, because I'm a grown-up.
I'll do one with you live on air if you want.
I know what my views are. I know what my views are, and I know how I vote. But you think that I'm far right. But am I racist as well? Heinous?
No, that's for you to decide, Julia.
I know whether I am or I'm not. Am I racist or heinous, or both?
I wouldn't come on here if I did think you were racist, because I wouldn't laugh on you.
Just the audience.
Yeah, no, just some of your audience.
Just some of the audience who miraculously have your email. Funnily enough, I'm not quite sure how.
Look me up and find my email and tell me that I'm a white traitor and all the rest. I'll get it. I will.
Send them to me. Send them to me. Absolutely. And again, I would be as horrified as you've been by that. But I think if you think that is my audience.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, in all seriousness, and listen, I wouldn't come on your show if I thought you were racist.
That's nice of you.
I do not think this is intentional. I think through the gaps and through genuine concerns with immigration, which people have because it's not been tackled by progressive, series of governments haven't taken this seriously as an issue because of not listening to working class communities. There are now people seeking to divide, the likes of Nigel Farage, the likes of Tommy Robinson, been doing it for years, but they're seeking to point and blame brown people and people of a different culture for the problems.
By the way, we were all racist, and we're going to have to break because the time is against us, but we were all racist when we voted for Brexit as well, and that was about limiting what was a vast majority of white European people come to this country. We can't win, folks. James Mathewson, I still appreciate coming on the show, even if you've insulted my audience, but former Labour Party spokesman James Mathewson, I don't want anyone receiving any abuse for anything they say. I really, really don't. So do not, if anyone has done that, don't do it. Don't give them ammunition. But yeah, I'd love to hear your response to what you had to say. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to have to take a quick break. We're going to be talking about those single-sex spaces that people seem to be very uncomfortable about providing, even in the wake of that Supreme Court judgment. Amy Gallagher's up next. This is Talk.
Yeah, another sign of the sort of epidemic of shoplifting across the country. Remember, in England and Wales last year, there were 516,000 offences reported to police. So that doesn't include all the shop theft crimes that go unreported. 516,000, that was up 20% in a year. And what Greggs has done, because it's so concerned about this problem, is that it's ditching self-service fridges. So, you know, those fridges that you just...
Literally, you open the fridge, you take the sandwich.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Well, that got a bit lively, didn't it? Phone lines have rather lit up. Love to hear your thoughts on what Therese Mathewson had to say. So this is from far-right Julia Hartley-Brewer, but not racist, apparently, so thanks for that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's get to my next guest, Amy Gallagher, waiting patiently on the line. Amy Gallagher, of course, you'll know, as a commentator at the New Culture Forum, an all-round sensible soul. Amy, thank you so much for waiting on the line.
That's all right. Thanks, Julia.
You're probably far right too, probably. I mean, probably. I think we all are now, aren't we? Everyone's far right now. Let's talk about the extraordinary situation we've got after that Supreme Court ruling, which was very, very clear. The definition of woman is biological sex. So you can't let men who claim to be women, trans women, they call themselves, into women's safe spaces or single-sex spaces, because that would be against the law. We're still waiting for a formal final judgment from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. But meanwhile, shops and leisure centres and gyms and things have been told they can actually question someone who is trans, who is trying to access a single-sex space, who they don't believe is that sex. What can they do in that circumstance?
Yeah, I mean, this guidance really reads like common sense, actually, and it's completely in keeping with the Supreme Court ruling. So what they are able to do, if they have a single-sex space, like a woman's only changing room, and somebody is entering that space that people think is probably a man, they are able to challenge that person. They're able to say, look, you know, what is your sex? This is women's only space. You know, are you a woman? And if they say they are a woman, but everybody sort of thinks, no, this looks like a man, they're even allowed to ask for that person's birth certificate and for evidence to show that they are the sex that they're saying they are. And even then, because of course, under the Gender Recognition Act...
I thought was a bit of a problem here with the birth certificate.
Yeah, so under the Gender Recognition Act, people who've obtained a gender recognition certificate can change their birth certificate. So even then you have a problem. This is why the Gender Recognition Act has caused so many problems, because it introduced this idea of legal sex and biological sex, where you could even change what's written on your birth certificate, which to me is like some, you know, Orwellian rewriting of history. But what they have said, what this guidance says, even then, if somebody produces a birth certificate and you are still unsure, you can then still express concern and require further evidence. So this does give a lot of power back to employers and managers to be able to challenge.
Well, the question is whether they'll want to or not. And again, as long as they say they're not rude or offensive and they're not, you know, shouting abuse or anything, they're not being, you know, just simply, I'm so sorry, I'm just not sure, I'm not able to give you access. Now, I'm sure there'll be some situations where things go a bit wrong and people get, you know, there are wrong decisions made. But again, this is about protecting women's, people talk about dignity, but safety ultimately. Women not wanting to get naked, to be changing clothes, to be in an enclosed space with a man, a physical man, you know, when they believe that they should be in a single-sex space. There was a reason why we had those in the first place. It is fascinating how many organisations, the NHS, hospitals and others, dragging their feet, many other organisations dragging their feet, the Houses of Parliament dragging their feet, whether they're not going to change the rules. And yet, interestingly, we've had the Labour Party, we discussed it on the show yesterday, saying their all-women shortlist will not be open to trans women, i.e. men who want to go on an all-women shortlist. I don't approve of the all-women shortlist thing, but it's interesting, they've cancelled their Labour Women's Conference because they're not quite sure who should be allowed, because they've always allowed men who identify as women to come along. So this has really, you know, thrown everything up into the air, but it still hasn't resolved yet.
Yeah, I think people are still adjusting, but I do welcome this guidance because it does say that if you have a single-sex space, well, you claim it's a single-sex space, but you allow in transgender people, it ceases to be a single-sex space. And what you actually do is you open up yourself to claims of sex discrimination, because if you allow in, for example, a man who says he's a woman into a woman's only space, but you don't allow in an ordinary man, well, you're actually discriminating against him, because why can't he be allowed in and the other man can?
It's just mindless, isn't it? It's always interesting that we never end up talking about trans men, i.e. women who identify as men, wanting to use the men's loos. I mean, there's an occasional person on social media. It never seems to be an issue. It always seems to be men wanting to access women when they're vulnerable or undressed, isn't it? It's weird, that.
Yeah, I mean, this has been the big problem, and it's been obviously there's a focus on women's rights within all of this because, I mean, all of this guidance, to me, it just reads like common sense. But the point is, over the last 10 or 15 years, people have been terrified of just applying common sense because of gender ideology and fears of being called transphobic or bigoted. When actually most people were just trying to ensure that women were safe from predatory men.
And obeying the law. And as we discovered from the Supreme Court, the law didn't change. They just confirmed what it had always been. Amy Gallo, short but sweet, always great to talk to you, commentator at the New Cultural Forum. Claire Pissell, nodding away to all of that.
Oh, Amy's
in a far-right sort of way,
probably. Absolutely, but non-racist, so that's all right. But Amy's, she's just so spot on with this. We need to have common sense. We need to have that guidance being followed. It's as simple as that.
But aren't you amazed by how many organisations, including you work in the House of Commons, not following it? I'm sorry, going to have to be some legal challenges, folks. There really are. Anyway, lots more coming up on everything. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament. To respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us because, as you know, that's right there. That's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. A lively one we've had already, hasn't it? It's coming up towards 3 minutes past 11 o'clock. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Delighted to be joined still by Claire Pissell, former Conservative government advisor. We're both far right, apparently, according to our former Labour guest. I mean, mind you, he's so far left, with due respect to you, James Matthews, he thinks the Labour Party is probably far right now. What can you do? But there we are. Whether you are listening on DP Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, he thinks you're heinous. I love it. My heinous audience, but there we are. Hiya. I love you, though. Do you know what's so weird, Claire? Is a few years ago, if you called somebody far right or racist or all of these sort of words, that would really hurt. I mean, that would. These words are now thrown around so happily and easily about anyone who expresses most reasonable concern about the most reasonable things in the most reasonable terms. It doesn't have any power anymore, and I think that's really terrifying. It's like calling, saying like, fascist or the word genocide being used, about certain wars and things. These words cease to lose their meaning.
They do, and it becomes a sort of badge of honour if I get called far right or extreme by certain people. I just sort of think, OK, that means I'm on the right track and I'm right and you're not. I just don't...
It's just pathetic.
I don't get offended by it, and I think they want me to be offended.
But these are the same people who, when I used the term Remainer, so we talked a lot about Brexit last days, that's an outrageous term. No, it's not. It's different from a Remainer. Remainer is somebody who voted Remain. Remainer is someone who's moaning still all these years on since 2016 and tried to stop the vote for Brexit and trying to undermine it since. I could just call you a non-democrat, an anti-democrat. But it is bizarre the words they do get upset about while throwing out the most outrageous slurs on people.
Because they're allowed to do it to the people like us, but we're not allowed to give it back.
But that's because they're the good people.
Clearly.
Did you not get that memo?
I must
They're
have
the
forgotten
kind
it.
people. We're not. We're heinous. Hello, my heinous fellow souls.
My new T-shirt.
The weird thing is, though, we all seem to be happier than them. Have you noticed that?
Yes. Funnily enough, when you sort of hang around with some other heinously right-wing people, you have such a good laugh.
You have such a good... They
really
throw
do.
great parties. They throw great parties. Anyway, including myself, but there we are. Anyway, should we get to some news? Let's talk about what we're talking about today. Inflation has risen to 3.5%. That's in April, up from 2.6% in March. About what was expected. Oh, so that makes it OK then. But it's all thanks to basically rising energy bills, rising water bills, rising council tax bills. I wonder who that could be down to, an awful lot of it. Oh, Labour Party government and their policies? I wonder. Sorry for being far right. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has said that Britain is becoming a police state under Labour. This after Lucy Connolly lost her appeal yesterday against her 31-month prison sentence for an online rant about migrants on the day of the Southport attacks. Plus, Britain is prepared to impose sanctions on senior members of the Israeli government after suspending trade talks with the country. This is over what Foreign Secretary David Lammy calls his monstrous and intolerable military expansion in Gaza. David Lammy, wait until you hear about the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, every other attempt we've attempted to take on Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And, oh, my God, what we did in the Second World War too. You're going to be absolutely shocked and horrified. Also, an Iraqi Kurd who smuggled himself into Britain on the back of a lorry. They don't all come on boats, folks. He's won his fight to stay here, despite telling officials he was going to make up a reason for seeking asylum. The 30-year-old man claimed to have lost his Iraqi ID card and argued that sending him back would breach his human rights. No doubt he could also claim, if he had brought his dog, as one other asylum seeker coming on a Channel boat did a few months ago, that having his dog here gave him a right. The dog, by the way, as the front page of The Sun is telling us, we've been paying for the last 4 months in quarantine. He's a German Shepherd, so I assume we can send him back to Germany. That's where his heritage is, after all. Anyway, all of those stories coming up, plenty more besides. Claire Pearson, as I say, is here. Let's start with inflation. Look, you know as well as I do, you knock on doors, on doorsteps during elections. Things are not going well for your party. We'll come to that in a moment. But inflation going back up to 3.5%. Is a big worry for people. We've actually seen, on average, above inflation wage rises for people, but a lot of that is simply making up for people who did not get 11% pay rises when we had 11% inflation. So Government Minister Steve Reid, the minister I've always gotten very well with. I like this guy. He's a good talker, but he was on air saying about how, look, it was chaos before. We've been bringing inflation down. Inflation was, I think, 2.1% when Labour got in, and now it's 3.5%.
And it's only going to keep going up. If you look at the decisions that are being taken by the Chancellor and a Labour Party who hates private enterprise. And I think that's what I take from this, is they want to squash any aspiration, they want to squash any entrepreneurism, and they want to tax the rich by whatever percentage. And I think it was really interesting with James Matthewson when he pushed him and said, how much is enough? He wasn't going to tell you.
There's this idea that the rich people in this country don't pay enough. Look, there's absolutely the case when we talk about inheritance tax, for instance. The very rich, they have trusts. They don't pay inheritance tax. Most people don't pay inheritance tax. They don't have enough assets. But there is a group of people, I mean, a large number of people every year, who do pay inheritance tax on their family estates because they've worked hard. And they go, oh, well, you just had a house that increased in value. No, but someone still had to struggle and strive to pay the mortgage on that, save up for the deposit for that home, and they did well and worked hard. So what? Well, we're going to, how dare you have a house that increases in value? How very dare you? I mean, it's that sort of thing. But the very, very rich don't pay those sort of taxes, but the very rich do pay 30% of taxes in this country. They are funding the most of us. If you're earning under 45 grand in this country, you're being subsidised by those very rich people who are paying tax. The question is, at what point do they're being held by the fact that you empty their bins, or you're pushing the trolley in the as a porter in the NHS? I mean, it's not. I'm not being in any way at all. I've done enough low-paid jobs in my time, or average-paid jobs. It's not being disrespectful at all. But the reality is, those very rich people over there, they're paying for a lot of the country. There's people in the city we mock and laugh at. They're paying for a hell of a lot of stuff. When they get those bonuses, when they get a £500,000 bonus, best part of 250 grand of that goes in the Treasury coffers. We benefit from that. Now, at the end of the day, do you think that Angela Rayner has the right idea? Because there's clearly this battle between sort of left and right in the party. There's a memo that's been she wrote in March to the Treasury from her as a Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary to the Chancellor, basically calling on for her to raise about 8 different taxes, basically on the rich, so on banks, but on people higher rate taxpayers, on savers with an awful lot of savings, basically cutting their tax benefits, the amount of tax rebate you can get for savings and things like that. Basically, it's all basically tax the rich, raise maybe 3-4 billion quid a year. If you did that, you wouldn't have to do spending cuts. Now, the reality is, it won't touch the sides of the costs of what needs to be cut from government coffers spending. But does this tell you there is a battle going on between the left and the right in the Labour Party behind the scenes already, just 10 months into government?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is her laying out her pitch for a leadership challenge in the not too distant future, because you look at the popularity of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party as a whole, the net approval rating is appalling and it keeps going down, and we're only, as you say, 10 months in. So I think that she's positioning herself as the union's girl to take over as Prime Minister, and that's why she's doing it. It's a real Corbynista style arrangement that she wants the government to accept. I
mean, I have to say, with all due respect to Angela Rayner, and I know a lot of people criticise her and everything, and she does a lot of things I don't agree with, but the woman has an incredible, awful phrase, backstory in terms of what she's achieved.
Oh, absolutely.
But at the end of the day, I don't think she's a woman who perhaps understands private business or how markets work, or basically really believes in capitalism. You mentioned polls. I want to mention those because Reform have basically told Keir Starmer with their EU deal, which we talked a lot about this week, that's going to cost the election. They're trying to move on to sort of, I think there's a lot of criticism from the left of the Labour Party that Keir Starmer's moving into, Nigel Farage territory, Reform territory, talking about an island of strangers and tackling mass uncontrolled immigration, and at the same time, he's angering the left there, but no one on the right believes him at all because they know he's not going to do anything about it. We've got this EU youth mobility scheme, they're going to call it youth experience scheme, that's something they're looking at and trying to negotiate. They said it'd be capped, we understand, at 100,000 people, but the EU want people to be able to bring their family members in. Well, if you're a 25-year-old coming over to the UK to work or study, why the hell are you bringing your family? I mean, unless we're talking about their kids, in which case, I don't know, we're talking about people setting up home here. We're never going to be able to send these people back. Of course they want to come here. We've got countries with youth unemployment of 50%, large parts of Southern Europe. But Reform saying your EU deal is going to cost you the next election. It's interesting. The party that's most being hurt at the moment in the polls is actually the Tory party. Latest YouGov poll, Reform are on 29%. They are hovering around this number. When they had the odd moment where they reached above 25%, people go, oh, it's an outlier. Routinely now, of course, we've seen actually in the local elections, Runcorn by-election, they are delivering on the day. They're not just polls, not what you think online, what people actually do when they get to the ballot box. But Reform on 29%, Labour down at 22%. They lost more than 10 points in 10 months after the election. Liberal Democrats in third place. What the actual at 17%? The Tories down to 16%. What do you make of that?
It's appalling. And
when you say it's appalling, what do you mean?
The leadership of the Conservative Party at the moment has no plan for what the Conservative Party is going to be. We're in opposition. We've taken an absolute beating in a set of local elections. We took an absolute beating at the general election of last year. And you need to be able to come out fighting, and that's the one thing the Conservative Party hasn't done. What are your core values? What are your policies going to be? You can talk about renewal all you like. Basically, you've now got to resuscitate the Conservative Party. I think, renewal is a nice idea, but you're going to have to come up with something pretty quickly.
And this idea of having 2 years of looking at policy, many people have predicted Kemi Badenoch won't survive the 2 years. I've always said, I like Kemi Badenoch. I think she's been staunch on some of the issues I care about. Yeah. At the end, didn't hear her on things like lockdown, and you can't be a freedom fighter if she's late to some parties. She's ahead of the game. She's questioning net zero earlier on because she was in cabinet again. Collective responsibility at the end of the day. I want to know what you're doing to fight it behind the scenes. Yeah. That's the thing. Keir Starmer, he was claimed, remember, during the Labour leadership battle, and it was Lisa Nandy who actually pointed out, he was saying that he did question, anti-Semitism and stuff from Jeremy Corbyn in cabinet, in shadow cabinet, and Lisa Nandy said, no, you didn't. I was there. You didn't do it. I mean, it just called him out on it. It's important to know what happens there. But a lot of people say that at this point that Kemi Badenoch on these poll ratings, she is not going to survive until after the next local election. She'll be forced out.
And I think that's probably right.
And who should be leader then?
Oh, I mean, I'm not going to pick a leader. Anybody that I suggest...
everyone's saying Robert Jenrick is the obvious person.
If I suggest a name for a leader, it's guaranteed that they'll never get in. So I'm always the kiss of death when it comes to things like that. So I don't know. I think we need to actually just be looking to get behind a leader. That leader needs to be strong. So Kemi needs to actually come out fighting, and she's just not doing it.
More than she's doing right now. Very interesting. Love to hear your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. What about a former Tory leader? Still thinks he's got the chance of coming back. Boris Johnson. He has said that Britain is turning into a police state under Labour. This after Lucy Connolly lost her appeal yesterday. Talked about this on the show. Happened around this time yesterday. She lost her appeal against her 31-month prison sentence for I say tweet. We all still use that word. A post on social media, post on X on the day of the Southport attack. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do get in touch. 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. I was saying earlier, and got a call, I think it was Stephen, who said, come on, move on, it's 5 years ago. But Boris Johnson saying that we've got two-tier police, I think is a bit rich. He said that it was the judgment yesterday by the courts was crazy and inhuman. He said Starmer's Britain is losing its reputation for free speech and turning into a police state where we must all learn to fear the knock on the door simply for something we say. The UK police, he said, are now making over 10,000 arrests every year for online comment, more than the police in Russia itself. And this judgment is yet another propaganda gift for Vladimir Putin. And I was pointing out, I think quite rightly, that he was the head of a government that locked us in our homes 23 hours a day, told us to spy on neighbours. He authorised the spying, the monitoring by people trained in the military in the British government, the British officials, to monitor the online messages and the interviews and things that I was doing, other journalists, that scientists, Oxford University scientists and others, and even his own MPs. And my information, I've had a formal apology from a senior, from a lawyer representing the government. I've got it in writing, formal apology after they sent my information to a counter-terrorism unit in America because I was such a threat asking questions about lockdown policy. The idea that the police state and that the attack on freedom of speech in this country started under Starmer, it's got worse under two-tier Starmer, but it did not start under Starmer. Bearing in mind we had non-crime hate incidents, people getting a record for something that's quite literally, clue in the name, not a crime. That was going crazy from 2014, exploded under Boris Johnson, did nothing about it. He could have stopped it. He did nothing about it. I think he talks a good game. I really think he talks a good game. Writes a great column for the Daily Mail, but at the end of the day, he doesn't walk the walk when it comes to actually being in power and what he actually does.
No, he doesn't. He's a great campaigner, and that's the one thing that I've always said. He was a great asset to the Conservative Party because he brought everybody together. He reached out to those that we would never normally appeal to.
And he did get Brexit done. It wasn't perfect, but he was the only person who could do it at the time.
Absolutely.
And I thank him for that.
But I also do feel that he jumps on a bandwagon of something that is looking like it's popular.
Yes. Oh, this looks like my people feel strongly about Lucy Connolly.
Exactly.
I think I'll get on this bandwagon.
But he just, he flows with the wind and he'll go in a different direction. And then he looked at net zero and thought that was a really good idea. Thanks for that.
I think his wife thought that.
Indeed, but that's what I mean about moving with the wind.
Yeah,
so
do you agree with
just
everything? I mean, you're married to a lefty. You don't agree with half the things your husband says.
No, and he isn't going to persuade me otherwise. But I think Boris Johnson needs to go and have a little bit of peace and quiet somewhere else. I don't need to hear that he is
he the
the
great
answer.
white? We're told in the polls that the Tories would do better if Boris Johnson was the leader.
No, people have very, very short memories when it comes down to it, because all of the pandemic stuff, which was under his watch,
which is one of the reasons
great.
why we're in the economic doldrums we're in.
Absolutely is. And all of his handling of Pacific scandals as well in the House of Commons, where he thought that things were fine and he covered it up, and it's always the cover-up that gets them, he was responsible for.
Yeah. I know people say get over it. It's like, I feel so betrayed.
Yeah.
I feel so betrayed by that.
Absolutely.
I really, really do. On Lucy Connolly, though, what was the decision to send her to prison in the first place, and for so long, for 31 months? Was that the right decision back last August? Was it the right decision to not release her early? She's going to be out in August, so she would have served a year behind bars. She was sentenced to basically two and a half years. This was the full tweet. Even yesterday, again, everyone sort of narrows it down, and I shouldn't have done that. I should have read the full tweet. I'll read the full tweet to you. This is what she wrote on the day of and then deleted 3.5 hours later, on the day of the Southport attack, where we saw 3 little girls stabbed to death, and 8 other girls that also stabbed, living with those injuries, and adults too. A mass deportation now. Set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bees for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will have to endure. That she means obviously the families of those who lost their lives. If that makes me racist, so be it. Should she have ever gone to prison at all? Should she have been prosecuted in the first place?
I don't think so. Now, I had a different opinion at the beginning when there was a lot of information that wasn't given to us, and when you
false information that she'd written other racist tweets.
Absolutely, and that's what I find very, very difficult, because I had a clear view at the beginning. Yeah, she needs to go. Absolutely,
exactly
she deserves what's coming to her. However, no, I don't think so. I don't think you need to be locked up. She shouldn't have written it. She shouldn't have put it out there. But is it an actual crime to go to prison for 2.5 years? No, it absolutely isn't. There are worse things going on out there that need dealing with. There were other people who wrote much worse and were inciting people to go burn down hotels, for example. I don't see them being locked up for 2.5 years.
People who actually literally went on riots. And also, as pointed out earlier, those men carrying their Palestinian flag, waving it in their soft-top car, drove down basically the end of my road in North London a few years ago, waving a flag with a loud hailer. A loud hailer, caught on video, shouting, "We're going to rape your wives and daughters," and talking about the Jews.
They're still out there on the streets.
If Lucy Connolly had written a tweet about the Jews, she probably wouldn't have gone behind bars, because those guys, although nothing happened for ages, and then eventually they were arrested, no charges ever brought against those men for blatantly threatening rape against Jewish women and Jewish girls. In person. The people walking along that street, a large number of those will have been Jewish. Me, when I saw that video, you're talking about my friends, you're talking about my neighbours, you're talking about my daughter's school friends. That's what you're talking about. Not a single charge brought against those men on video. We've got their names, we've got their faces, got the car number plate on video committing that crime.
Yeah.
When people say we don't have two-tier justice in this world,
no, we absolutely
if they said it about black people, if they'd said it about Muslims, they were Jewish or atheists, I bet you anything they'd have been charged with a hate crime.
But she was a really easy target. It was out there and it was amplified on social media, as these things always are. But police knew where she lived. She was a member of a community. She
husband was
worked
a
in
Tory councillor.
And so she was an easy target, and it was so easy to get her and give her the advice to plead guilty, which I still think was wrong.
Indeed. This links into, I mean, how politics has been completely changed over this since the 7th of October attack on the 23rd in 2023. The Foreign Secretary yesterday announced sanctions against the Israeli government, members of the government, also ending trade talks with the Israeli government over what is going on in terms of the IDF military action in Gaza right now, and also the blockade over aid. Israeli government has been allowing some aid in. It's not actually getting to the right people. UN, every international body and charity, many of whom, by the way, are frankly, in my view, Hamas mouthpieces now. They really are. These are not independent bodies, not independent charities, a lot of them, but are pointing out, the horrific suffering of the people in Gaza. There's no doubt at all about that. Innocent men, women and children, particularly the children we're concerned about, who haven't got enough to eat. We've had talk about famine for best part of 2 years now. I mean, I'm amazed by how many people seem to look remarkably well in these videos when we've got talk of famine. There is plenty of video footage put out by people living in Gaza of, food in delicatessens and in supermarkets and in restaurants. So there's some big question marks about this. We know a load of aid went in. There was enough aid that went in for food to last till midsummer. That aid has probably been, as it has been previously and well documented, taken by Hamas fighters. They use it as a weapon of war themselves, even against their own people. But David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, announcing sanctions against members of a government which is the only democratic nation state in the Middle East, are close allies who are representing people who are the victims of the most heinous terror attack we have seen in many, many decades. Certainly the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust in the 1930s and 40s. They are fighting back against a terrorist organisation that says they will do it again at the first opportunity. That terrorist organisation is using civilians as human shields. Using civilians as human shields, whether you're in a refugee camp, under a hospital, in a school, that itself is a war crime. We don't see the calling out of Hamas by David Lammy. Indeed, Hamas thanked David Lammy and the British government for what they did yesterday. We're on the wrong side of history here, aren't we?
Yeah, we absolutely are. How can you be backing a terrorist organisation that carried out the atrocities and still continue to carry out atrocities against their own people? They aren't nice. They're never going to negotiate. They're never going to be reasonable.
They're only going to give up hostages when they're forced to. They don't do it out of the goodness of their heart. They took them out for a reason.
And then they use it as some kind of propaganda video when they hand these people back. And I think that's absolutely appalling. It's not to say that everything that has been done by the Israeli government is correct, because I think there are an awful lot of issues there. But you need to back up an ally, a democratic nation in the Middle East. Why do you punish them for the actions of a terrorist group? So David Lammy, I know you're going to be listening. Stop doing this. Ridiculous.
It's virtue signalling and it's appeasing a large Muslim vote in this country. We've got 5 MPs for Gaza. It's just shame. It's genuine. It's shame on our nation.
Yeah, it is.
The Israeli ambassador, who I know well, being called in to be admonished by the Foreign Secretary. I have to say, I hope she told him to do one, frankly. I really, really do. 11:26 the time. Love to hear your thoughts on all the topics we're talking about. 0344 499 1000. I must say, a lot of you are not happy with being called heinous and far right by my former Labour guest, James Mathewson, earlier. We'll get to some of those calls up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
it does is it underlines the real problem we have with our judiciary. And you know, Kev, I've been banging on about this for ages, that it's not the European Court of Human Rights that's the problem in getting rid of asylum seekers, it's the bloody lawyers, it's the judiciary.
Yes.
And the same thing applies here. You know, my suspicion is Keir Starmer would have been a bit happier if she had had her appeal upheld.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is the home of common sense for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Coming up to 11:29, coming up very soon, going to be talking to Jake Wallace-Simons about what David Lammy had to announce about Israel yesterday. Are we on the right side of history? I would say absolutely not. Again, I'm so ashamed of what happened yesterday. Talk about that in a few minutes. First up, though, let's get to your calls, 0344 499 1000, and texts and messages, in particular about Boris Johnson. Britain's turning a police state under Labour after Lucy lost that appearance, her 31-month prison sentence. Lily says, disagrees with me. Can we have that, please? Andy says, Julia, I completely agree with your tweet earlier about Boris cronies spying on us during lockdown. Gemma says, when people are physically attacked and sexual children and paedophiles get suspended or shorter sentences, then the judiciary is a disgrace. Nigel says, I don't know it's the real one. Nigel says, turning into a police state, rich coming for still lockdown. Brian says, it's too late. We've already turned into a police state. Bit late to the party, Boris. Dylan says, yeah, we turned into a police state under you, Boris. Sarah says, who cares what Bojo has to say? Carrie says, quick, someone tell Sherlock. We already knew that, Boris. Timothy Ade points out, I'd rather have him than Starmer. Let's go to your calls, though. A lot of them coming in about what our guest James Mathewson had to say. He's left the Labour Party, was a former Labour Party spokesman, because he doesn't feel the Labour Party represents him anymore, mainly because he's further on the left. I think it's a fair summary of what James Mathewson's views are. Dan is on the line. He's in Portsmouth. Dan, what do you want to say about what James Mathewson had to say? I suppose partly about, you know, you're one of the audience, so I mean, he was saying we're all far right and heinous, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah. Well, that's just to be expected. I was more concerned, but I'd love. The first thing they teach these rabid British hating lefties at lefty school is a question to ask to sort of confuse people, and what they ask is, what is British culture?
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to see the tables turned on them and say, well, what is Pakistani culture? What is African culture? What is New Zealand culture? And watch him explain, because when you actually break cultures down into their key components, they often sound a bit silly. It often sounds a bit jingoistic. Yeah. You know, it's easy to describe our culture, very easy, and it's just as easy to describe it as it is to any of those other countries.
Well, tell us, what is your idea of what our culture is?
In a word, I'd say you had it: politeness, queuing, respecting personal space, good manners, afternoon tea, pubs, Sunday roast, Guy Fawkes night, the tendency to break out into song when we've had a little bit too much to drink, boisterous, but you know, you can go on forever.
And these things are laughed at, aren't they? But
jumble sales, garden fetes, helping your neighbours.
Now, a lot of people will say you're harking back to a lovely time. Maybe some people might live like that. A lot of people living in our inner cities don't see any of that. Listen, you know, I get the tube in London every day. Very little of that.
Yeah, but you know why you don't see those things? Because it hasn't been defended and it hasn't been looked after and it's been eroded and it's been watered down.
And it's been mocked. Again, my first answer was sense of fair play. Honestly, that's what the queuing thing's about. You know, when you're in a foreign country, you go, why aren't people queuing? Because people don't do that. Again, so much of our... the underpinnings of our country and how we've gone about democratic change and getting more right has been about fairness and doing the right thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and these people just don't. It's always a real good question when they ask it. What is British culture? And sadly, the people on the other end of that question tend to freeze. Yeah. You know, because the things that come to mind, you start to think, that sounds a bit stupid, but it's not stupid.
No, it's not. Culture. It's not, and it's the stuff.
Fates, you know, all that stuff, it's British. But, you know, pubs, you should be ashamed of that just because it involves alcohol and is often linked to the negative connotations. It doesn't matter.
Pubs are a massive part of our culture. People flock from abroad. Do you know, one of the things I'm thinking, this is a classic bit of British culture, is it's a bank holiday weekend coming up. If there's an inkling of sunshine on one of the days, 5 million people will turn up at seaside resorts, freeze them, behinds off in a cardi, have an ice cream, and it'll rain, and they'll say, I've had a lovely day. That's Britain. If that isn't British culture on a miserable bank holiday, I don't know what is. Lovely call, Dan. Thank you so much. Let's go to... Now, this woman epitomises British culture. Georgina is in London. Hello, Georgina.
Good morning, my darling, and good morning, Claire. Good morning to you both.
Would you like to compliment Claire on her beautiful dress? You usually give us a compliment or two.
I think you both look magnificent.
Oh, I love it.
Did your husband give you as many compliments in a year as Georgina gives in an average week?
No, Georgina needs to come and teach him.
Yes.
I think he only notices when his dinner's not on the table, bless his heart. Well,
we're all married to them.
I hope that James Mathewson and Boris are listening. James, I've got to say, what you call far right, a normal thinking person calls common sense. I won't be losing any sleep of what you think about me, my darling. And if common sense is what you think is far right, then I am glad to wear that badge. Yeah. I want my freedom of speech, thought and choice, Julia, and woe betide any government who attempts to take that away from me, because I will not take that lying down. Claire, I've got to say, I've been a die-hard Conservative all my life, but was absolutely disgusted by the house arrest imposed on the UK by Boris. Also the encouragement of spying on our neighbours and dobbing them in. That was totally wrong. You know, or when they were having get-togethers, going out with girlfriends, etc., etc. Yeah. So my advice to Boris would be, shut up, Boris, and enjoy your political retirement. We do not want you back. Keir Starmer is just taking the police state baton from whence you left it. Now we have Keir Starmer dug into number 10 as deeply as an Alabama tick because of you, and sadly, unless he gets a vote of no confidence by his own cabinet, we will have to endure this hell for the next 4 years.
Yeah, and I hate to tell you, anyone who replaced him, given the Labour Party, would be a lot worse. Georgina, I have to leave it there. I'd have you on all the way till 1 o'clock, as you know. Always a pleasure, always talking sense. And again, it's that idea, isn't it? Things that are now regarded as far-right views by a lot of people on the left are actually the views that were completely common sense and mainstream. 10 years ago, things like, you know, men aren't women, should actually have border controls. I mean, mad, crazy things like that. 11:35 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to the great Jake Wallace-Simons. I imagine he is as horrified as I was by what the Foreign Secretary David Lammy had to say about those horrific baby killers in the Middle East. Oh, he was talking about Israel, not Hamas. But why? This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
11:37 is the time. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get straight to the next topic. And our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, and what he had to say in the House of Commons yesterday, where he announced there'd be sanctions against members of the senior figures in the Israeli government, but also that we would seize trade talks with Israel over what he called the monstrous and absolutely outrageous and unacceptable attacks on civilians in Gaza by the Israeli forces. But what is really monstrous and what is really beyond the pale, surely, is the British government not standing by our closest ally in the Middle East. Let's talk about this with Jake Wallace-Simons. He's author of the great book Israelophobia, the newest version of the oldest hatred and what to do about it. He's also now a columnist with the Daily Telegraph. Very good morning to you, Jake.
Good morning.
I have to say, I had to switch the telly off yesterday. I actually couldn't listen to David Lammy. I was so appalled. It's the virtue signalling to the media classes, to the BBC, to the backbenches, the MPs that aren't even Labour MPs, the MPs effectively who ran on a Gaza platform in their local constituencies, and this big concern about what people will think of you if you stand by Israel. Because, of course, if you do watch mainstream media in this country, if you only get your information from the BBC, you would think that Israel was responsible for the war that is currently going on in Gaza. Nothing to do with Hamas at all.
Yeah, and talking of what people think about it, the most interesting response, I think, came from Hamas. Hamas released a statement calling Lammy's new stance, which he's taken on behalf of our country, a principled stance. Now, if Hamas is calling your policy position a principled stance, that should tell you something about how history will judge you, let alone judge Israel. But there's something else I wanted just to point out to you, Julia, and to your viewers and listeners, because I think it hasn't been highlighted enough. This claim about 14,000 babies who need help or they're going to die within the next 48 hours.
And this is a claim, I think, from the UN now?
Made by the UN. It has been debunked by the BBC. It was a claim made on the Today programme yesterday by the UN chief Tom Fletcher. Yep. The BBC queried it and the UN came back and said, well, they want to get aid to 14,000 babies, quote, ideally within the next 48 hours. The BBC then dug further and found there was a UN report which said a while ago that 14,000 infants would likely experience malnutrition within April 2025 and March 2026, over a year, a period of a year, not within 48 hours. So it seems to be a load of rubbish which has been debunked by the BBC.
I mean, this is unusual. BBC Verify actually doing some work, actually verifying things, because normally they just call one of their friendly journalists who work for Hamas in Gaza and ask them what they think.
Yeah, call about.
And I'm not joking. That's literally what they do. I mean, it really is what's been going on. I mean, also the other thing that's being debunked, not seen it on the BBC or on Sky or ITV or anywhere else. All these reports the other week about this horrific attack on a hospital by IDF forces, dozens and dozens of civilians, including babies and young children, dying as a result of that. And then, and it being clearly a war crime, genocidal, etc., etc. But then it emerged that some very senior Hamas figures, including Mohammed Sawa, Yahya Sinwar's brother, was among those people who were killed in this attack. So then the idea that when the IDF say we're targeting somewhere because it's actually it's a command and control station for Hamas using human shields, that when they say that and then it's proven, the BBC never seems to backtrack and say that actually that was a legitimate war target.
Yeah, I mean, the most annoying thing really is how Hamas makes no secret of its strategy. It is to hide amongst civilians, to base its leaders, its fighters under hospitals, for example, as was the case here, in the hope that Israel will attack, killing civilians, and then the media will cover it as an Israeli, quote-unquote, war crime. It happens again and again, and we know that it's happening.
It's been debunked again and again as well. Now,
exactly. We know that Israel takes measures to protect civilians that no other army takes, and yet Hamas is trying to put children in harm's way for media wins. And the media has got blood in its hands, frankly, by playing into the strategy and making it all possible.
And indeed, and when I watched, and again, I consume a large array of different media because I want to hear different perspectives, but I have to say, again, I'm really struggling with the BBC now in some of their coverage because it is so one-sided. An awful lot of war reporters who apparently have never known any civilians die in wars. Now, the reality is, it's horrific what is happening to civilians in Gaza, but it is largely the fault of Hamas, who, as you say, not only they've not not mind if civilians die. Not only are they deliberately putting them down, they actively want civilians. They want to have bodies of dead children because they can parade them in the media. And by the way, not a single bit of footage comes out of Gaza on our television screens which hasn't been given a big tick from Hamas. They control what comes out of the country. So they're actively willing this way. It's part of their war policy is to deliberately have civilian casualties. They actually, in the past, have stopped civilians when they get a warning from the IDF that we are going to be, bombing this particular target because we believe there's a Hamas commanders there. And civilians are warned, and that happens routinely. They stop civilians leaving so that they would rather they die. But again and again and again, the war reporters, the correspondents, some really senior figures at the BBC, they treat this war as if it is, like Gary Lineker appears to think, because he gets his news from TikTok, completely unprecedented. The level of death, the number of civilians, the number of children who are dying, the targeting of civilian targets. This is unprecedented in modern warfare. And none of that is true, is it?
That's right. I mean, it's the Lineker classes, if you like, by which I include a lot of the mainstream media reporters and David Lammy. Yeah. It's these people who their response enables Hamas's strategy. In the eyes of Hamas, every single civilian death, whether it's on its own side or on the Israeli side, is a victory. Yeah. From the Israeli point of view, every single innocent death, whether it's on the Palestinian side or on the Israeli side, is a tragedy and a defeat. And it's our media classes, our Lineker classes, who have enabled this. And I would say that, I mean, you talk about the focus on civilian deaths in this conflict. We just need to cast our mind back to our own war against the Islamic State in 2017-2018, when we engaged in the Battle of Mosul, supporting Iraqi and Kurdish ground troops with our American partners from the air. That had a death toll of about up to 40,000 people, and nobody cared. There were nobody on the streets of London protesting against the civilians who were killed in that campaign, because we wanted Islamic State, who blew up people on our streets, massacred people in Paris, in Berlin, in Brussels, in Stockholm and elsewhere, many of which I covered on the ground as a reporter. We wanted them gone, we wanted them dead, and we didn't really care how it was done. Suddenly, when the Israelis are trying to defend their own people from the similar butchery by a similar organisation, everyone's up in arms and telling them to stop. Why do they want them to stop? Because, unfortunately, they favour Hamas. They want Hamas to win.
But this is the terrible thing. And again, the British Army, the American Army, no Western military power has ever achieved the ratio of civilian deaths to combatant deaths in any modern warfare at all. So not the Second World War, not in the Iraq War, not Afghanistan War, not, as you say, taking on ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And when I say that, not because Israel and their forces are killing uniquely huge numbers of civilians, which is what the impression is. I've spoken to so many friends, and I always think you're just getting all your news from the BBC, aren't you? Because they think that is what's happening. On the contrary, no government has ever achieved in their warfare the low number of civilian deaths. Every death is a tragedy, but the one roughly, even on Hamas's own figures, the roughly 1-to-1 ratio of civilian to combatant deaths has never been achieved, and that's because they're being so careful. It is still a tragedy when any child or innocent civilian, adult or others, dies. But the reality is, this is what we call war. This is why you don't start wars. This is why you try not to have wars. You avoid wars. You try to end wars. What do you make of this idea that Israel needs to be sort of pushing for a ceasefire? They need to be withdrawing troops. They need to be negotiating, because that's how you get the hostages out. Is that the answer?
Well, I think that it's, if I had an answer, I would, nobody really has the answer. Everyone only has judgment. And in the past, we've seen that the first wave of hostages that were released by Hamas came as a response to intense military pressure from the Israelis. Subsequently, we've seen that as well. Yes, there's negotiation, but that negotiation only happens when you put Hamas under enough pressure to bring them to the negotiating table. I mean, the extent to which Hamas is still holding out these hostages, even though all of their leadership has been decimated and destroyed and killed, many of their thousands upon thousands of their fighters have been killed, Gaza's been destroyed, Hezbollah's been taken out, the Iranians have been humiliated, they're still holding on to these hostages underground. I mean, this is just...
torturing them and starving them.
of how appalling these people are. They're not even people. These animals are, frankly.
Yeah.
And Israel wants its people back and is entitled to want its people back. I would want the British government to go to the ends of the earth to get me back.
And we would. A lot of the people, and including the MPs, who right now are condemning Israel, I'd love to know, where would you be right now if this had happened, if October the 7th had happened in our country? What would you be expecting to do? Because we know what happened after 9/11, again, going into Afghanistan, the perceived threat from Iraq and going to Iraq. All of these things had massive public support, massive support in Parliament as well. And, I know we were lied to in terms of that, 45 minutes in Iraq, but massive support for all of these wars, where far greater number of civilians died. I mean, on a much, much grander scale. And it just seems to me, we need to be on the side. There'll be errors made. We won't. And I'm sure neither you nor I hold a candle for Benjamin Netanyahu. But at the end of the day, there's one democratic nation state in the Middle East, and that is Israel. Yeah. They are fighting a war against Islamo-fascists who seek to kill every single one of them. And once they've killed every Jew, they're going to come for everyone else as well. Yeah, they are at the gates protecting the rest of us, and we need to be by their side.
Exactly, and when David Lammy and his ilk are asked what their suggestion is for getting the hostages out and destroying Hamas so they never do October the 7th again, all they come up with is the two-state solution. Yeah. The best thing to do is look at these guys and say, hey, let's give you a state. That will help. Then everyone will be happy and everyone will be safe. It won't happen like that. They don't want a state alongside Israel. They've rejected it year after year, decade after decade. What they want is a state instead.
They want a one-state solution. That state doesn't involve Israel.
They want a one-state solution involving something called genocide in its real meaning.
Jake Wallace-Simons, you've been a fantastic advocate on this, author of the brilliant book. I do recommend you buy this book, Israelophobia. Thank you very much indeed. Claire Pearsall, your response?
I think he's absolutely spot on with all of this, and it's an embarrassment that our Foreign Secretary is taking the side of a bunch of terrorists over the democratic nation of Israel. I just don't understand his thinking. I really, really don't.
No. David Lammy is more upset about being charged extra for a French taxi ride than he is by what Hamas did on October the 7th. I'm serious.
He needs to go and watch the footage of the Nova Festival on October the 7th. Really go and tell me that isn't.
But again, also, people talk about revenge. No, well, I mean, I've got no problem with Israel taking revenge, actually. Yeah. I don't. That's why we expect us to do. But this is a defensive war. Israel did not start this war. Hamas did. And Israel are going to have to finish it. Otherwise, they're going to come back again. How many of our people, how many of our young people and our children would we allow to be slaughtered by a terrorist organisation before we'd say, you know what, gloves are off, in we go. It's as simple as that. You know it, I know it. It's just obscene. I'm genuinely so embarrassed and ashamed of what our government did yesterday. 11:50 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, we're going to talk to Ben Habib about asylum seekers, the latest madness, including a German Shepherd dog. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
What it does is it underlines the real problem we have with our judiciary. And Kev, I've been banging on about this for ages, that it's not the European Court of Human Rights that's the problem in getting rid of asylum seekers, it's the bloody lawyers, it's the judiciary.
Yes.
And the same thing applies here. My suspicion is Keir Starmer would have been a bit happier if she had her appeal upheld.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, yeah.
Across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 11:52 is the time. PMQs coming up. We're not going to be taking it live because it doesn't usually prove worth taking live, but the wonderful Peter Cobb will be here to tell us what happens, so to give us some clips of the best bits so he can watch it so you don't have to. Right now, though, delighted to welcome Ben Habib to the show. He's a former Brexit Party MEP and joins us right now. Very, very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you so much
Good
for
to
joining
see
us.
you.
We've not got much time, so let's get straight to it. But the latest madness on yet another asylum seeker allowed to stay in this country under spurious grounds. Not an Albanian whose kids don't like Albanian chicken nuggets. Not someone who's a paedophile his kids will lose out because he's not with them. This time it's a 32-year-old Iraqi Kurd. Smuggled himself into Britain, not on the boats, but in the back of a lorry. That still happens on a grand scale. He's won his fight to stay here, despite telling officials he didn't have a reason, but he was going to make up a reason for seeking asylum. And he said that basically he claimed to have lost his Iraqi ID card and that sending him back, he said, would breach his human rights. This is crazy.
It is crazy. And I mean, it all goes back to the Human Rights Act, the European Convention of Human Rights, which have been put into our body of law and then effectively weaponized by our judiciary. If you need evidence of two-tier criminal justice, it's this. You know, the favouring of someone who actually turns up in court and says, I haven't really got a reason to be here, but please be nice to me.
So I'm going to lie. I mean, I'm joking. I'm going to lie.
I know. It's extraordinary. And you know what strikes me is that Western governments across the board are now hijacked by the sort of political philosophical ideology which underpins, for example, this case. But also it's the same political philosophical ideology about which you were talking to Jake just now. The inability for us to recognize who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. You know, if this was September 1939, we would now be saying, well, we don't really want to challenge Germany because, you know, people might die.
Yeah, if we bombed Dresden, then God knows what might happen. Yeah.
And, you know, Winston Churchill, under the International Criminal Court of Justice, would be a war criminal. And I think what's gone wrong, Julia, is that the primary purpose of government, which is the protection of its own people in its own country, has now been subjugated for the protection of every individual, no matter how awful they are.
And the idea also that everyone has the same rights, not just British citizens, but anyone around the world. You know, again, this all comes back to this idea, particularly on the left, that they don't really believe in the nation state. I think that's a bad thing. They like big. They want World Health Organization. They want the UN. They want the European Union. They think that they're much better at things rather than nation states. They don't really believe in borders, and hence we've got this problem. I mean, there's another story, front page of the Sun today, send it bark is the headline. But we've paid for, basically, for 4 months for an asylum seeker's dog to stay in this country in quarantine. We brought our dog back from living abroad. Costs an absolute fortune. He's a German Shepherd. He arrived across the channel in a dinghy packed with migrants. It's believed to be the first case of its kind. He's a German Shepherd, so I'm assuming we could just send him back. His heritage, German, I don't know. But I mean, this is a madness, but you just know, and it's a point Claire made earlier, you just know that the migrant whose dog this was is going to be able to claim, well, I've got my dog here, so I've got family and life here under Article 8 of human rights legislation, so I get to stay. And that's the madness we're living with, because we're living under the authorities of people who don't really believe in the nation state and don't believe in Britain.
That is the root cause of all this evil. It's the root cause of everything. They don't believe in this country. They don't believe in civil society in the United Kingdom. They don't think that being a British citizen actually affords British citizens any kind of privilege or greater right than anyone else. As you say, it doesn't matter where you're from. Your rights are identical. Indeed, if you come to this country and you're from an ethnic minority, you are promoted. You get greater rights. You know, I'm reading forever things like iPads being handed out, free tickets to football matches to illegal migrants and so on. And actually, they should be all rounded up, put in a camp of hence, and then we should ditch the ECHR and deport them.
I don't think, I've said to you wrong, I don't think ditching the ECHR is enough now. I think we have to basically go through our activist judges, because I think they are the problem. Their interpretation of the human rights legislation bears no relation to the actual legislation, if you read it. You don't have to be a lawyer to say that. Can I ask you also, though, about, I want to talk a bit about British culture, because the debate earlier on about what is British culture, and I was thinking, I said first answer, sense of fair play, and that's why British people, it's not fair play. But I want to ask you also about this plan for this youth mobility scheme. They're going to rename it as something else, like a work experience scheme or something. Basically, it's going to be young Europeans, there are millions and tens of millions of them coming over here, being able to work and live here under this scheme. The cap that we're told now would be around 100,000 if it does go ahead, which certainly Keir Starmer wants it to do. But the EU want those people to be allowed to bring their own families with them. What do you make of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes again back to what you were saying, that those who govern us don't believe in the nation state. And Keir Starmer last week was talking about the importance of controlling immigration. And here he is a few days later taking our borders down. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And anyone that wishes to be governed from Brussels, that wishes to enmesh the United Kingdom in the supranational institutions that basically undemocratic, is someone that is essentially anti-British. And so I can't help but conclude, Julia, that Keir Starmer and his ilk, these kind of rabid Europhilia, that they've suffered from Europhilia, they are basically anti-British.
But they are. But they think the British people are, far right and bigoted and ignorant. Again, fooled by words on the side of a bus, and we can't be trusted with making the decisions ourselves.
Yeah, and so, we've got to row this all back. We need a complete restoration of our constitutional framework. And we need to then, as you rightly say, it's not just sufficient to change the law. What we've now got to do is go through our civil service, go through the judiciary, the police, the other institutions, where we need to absolutely get rid of all these people who stand against the nation state. And you talked about British culture.
Yeah,
the other big damage, very brief, the other big damage by codifying human rights and that sort of thing is to set aside British culture. It's for us to, it's to force us to forget what it means to be British.
Yeah. Absolutely. Ben, really appreciate you joining us. Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP. We've covered a lot of this. I haven't had a chance to get back to Claire Pearce. I know she'll have plenty to say on that. Lots more coming up. I want to hear from you as well. Again, that idea of being British, and again, the borders. We're talking about inflation. We're talking about Boris Johnson, Lucy Connolly, you name it. Get in touch. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. Yeah. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because, as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, on your connected device, great to have your company. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I'm with you live until 1 o'clock. PMQs has just started in the Commons, but we'll be getting the clips and the highlights from Peter Carbon a little bit later. He's going to watch it, so you don't have to. I've taken it live a couple of times lately, and I'm not entirely sure that always pays off. I'm not going to lie. I think it does go on quite a long time. Claire Pearson is a former Conservative government advisor, and I have to say, there's no doubt at all, Keir Starmer is on the ropes, from the left and the right of his party. Kemi Bade not very much on the ropes as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. We're going to see those two characters whose parties are lining up behind them to see who is the next replacement. And it's on both sides. But so soon for Keir Starmer, only 10 months. It takes us in the Conservative Party quite a lot longer than that to ditch a leader.
Yeah, but in opposition though, I mean, I spent a long time as political editor. In opposition, you won a year for quite a period of time. But anyway, I want to hear from you on all the topics we're talking about as well. But we're coming up in this hour, we're going to talk about inflation. It's risen to 3.5%, up from 2.6% in March. That's the figure for April, according to the ONS. It's all thanks to rising energy bills, rising water bills, and rising council tax bills. So an awful lot of it is the responsibility of this government. Plus, Boris Johnson has said that Britain is becoming a police state under Labour. This after Lucy Connolly lost her appeal against her 31-month prison sentence for an online rant about migrants on the day of the Southport attacks. I've been pointing out earlier, a little bit rich for Boris Johnson, who locks in our home for 23 hours a day, did absolutely nothing about non-crime hate incidents when he was in power, to talk about us becoming a police state. Don't you think, Bozza? Plus, taxpayers have forked out thousands of pounds to house a dog that crossed the channel with its illegal immigrant owner in a packed dinghy. The German Shepherd has now spent at least 4 months in quarantine at taxpayers' expense. And going to go stateside, Donald Trump wants Britain to raise its defence spending by tens of billions of pounds to set an example to the rest of Europe. Pentagon chiefs have told their British counterparts the US president would be happier if the UK hit 3% of GDP by 2029. That's years earlier than planned. I have to say, I'd be a lot happy because we might be able to have an attempt to defend ourselves and our allies. But there we are. All that coming up. I do want to hear from you on any of the topics we're talking about. A lot of people on the phone lines. We're going to get to as many of your calls as we can in the next hour or so. But Boris Johnson in particular saying Britain is turning into a police state under Labour after Lucy Connolly lost her appeal against her sentence. What's your reaction to him saying that? Your reaction also, a lot of you still getting in touch about James Mathewson. He's a former Labour Party spokesman. He was on the show about an hour ago and he was talking about, well, you know, you and I, we're all heinous and far right, basically, for our apparently right-wing views. But and you're all probably racist too, according to him. But basically, he's saying, you know, he couldn't really seem to define British culture. In fact, even people talk about English culture was somehow a racist idea. I don't think it is at all. What is your idea of what English or British culture is? I know the Scots will say it's not the same thing. No, everyone's quite happy to define Scottish culture. They're all Welsh culture, aren't they? All French culture. What's so wrong about English or British culture? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Free, of course, on YouTube to leave a message, and free, of course, on X as well. As I say, Claire Pearsall is still here. Claire, I mean, and by the way, my next guest, just to warn you, I'm sure you're listening right now, Mark Littlewood, I do want to hear from you on what your ideas of British or English culture is. Claire Pearsall, I mean, it was really interesting what James Mathewson said. Sorry if you just tuned in, but he was being very, very clear about, you know, he's left the Labour Party because it's basically not right, not left wing enough for him. But he was being very sort of scathing about this idea of right wing here, and heinous is the word he used about my audience. And me, and talking about, you know, you don't know what English culture is or British culture, and he's very scathing about it. But what's your notion of what that is?
I think he's embarrassed by English culture, and I think that's the real issue. Why should you?
I'm not that keen on Morris dancing, I'm not going to lie.
Morris dancing and maypoles, not my thing. However, the innate sense of fairness of English culture. Let's just put it down to English culture. Let's not offend anybody else whilst I'm at it. But I think it's that innate sense of fairness, the fact that we can have a laugh at ourselves.
Such a key thing.
It absolutely is. You don't take yourself too seriously, but the minute someone else does it to you, we all gang together. And that's what I love about it.
I think our
the
sense of humour is a huge part of our culture.
And you don't get that when you go abroad. People don't make those kind of jokes that we will make to each other and will accept.
Yeah.
And that should be our strength, and we should welcome that this is our culture.
We're honest. We're very honest
about
ourselves and our limitations and the things. I mean, we talk about the weather a lot because we talk about it because it's a big part of our country, but also we put our country down for it. As I was saying earlier, Bank Holiday weekend approaching, weather's looking dire.
It's a joy, isn't it?
Although not as dire as for my husband, who's going to a Scotch whisky festival. This year, they're excited. They're in a camper van, not in one-man tents. So I think it's going to be a bit better as they drink whiskey from 11 in the morning onwards. Sorry. Taste whiskey, wink, wink, and then sort of fall asleep in a wet tent. I mean, sounds like my idea of hell. Lovely. He and his mates have a lovely every time. But that's the idea of a bank holiday in this country. And I say, even if it's raining, you get a tiny bit of sun coming out behind the clouds. As Sunday, Monday, people are going to be on those beaches. Huddled up under a blanket and going, I've had a great day. And that's British spirit.
It's nearly June. You have to take your sun cream, your towel,
I may need an umbrella,
raincoat.
but I'm having a barbecue. That's the spirit.
And that's what we love, and this is what we do.
Thank you. Exactly. So I want to hear from you. 03444. Oh, yes. Oh, fish and chips. 03444. I'm hungry now. 4991000 is the number to call. Well, let's put that question to Mark Little. He's the Director of Popular Conservatism and joins us right now for a chat about a lot of the things in the public view right now. Mark Little, what is your idea of what English or British culture is?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think you've hit on a few of the key characteristics, Julia. What would I say? Stoical, self-deprecating, phlegmatic, keep calm and carry on, quite informally ordered. If there isn't a queue for something, we'll start one.
Yes.
Those are some of the...
That's all part of fair play.
Yes, I agree. That's all part of fair play.
Yeah.
I think there's quite a lot of cultures, though, that would say that they have a sense of fair play. I mean, my problem, I've given you a list of sort of adjectives which I think sum up England. I think my problem about this is, although it's very real, it's very hard to define.
Yeah.
I think if you asked me to define an elephant, I'd struggle, but I know one when I see one.
Yes.
I find it a bit difficult to define Englishness, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's tricky to define, can be a bit nebulous and abstract, doesn't mean it's not real. And often those who wish to undermine national culture sort of have this throwaway line, oh, is it just about warm beer and cricket? Is that all you mean? No, it's a rather harder, more abstract thing to define than that, but that doesn't mean it's an unimportant thing.
As you say, you know it when you see it. Absolutely. Really interesting. Thank you very much indeed for that. I must ask you first of all about Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, wants to be Prime Minister again if we believe some of the reports in the press. He has said that we risk becoming a police state under Keir Starmer. This is particularly in relation to the decision of the appeal court yesterday not to reduce the length of the sentence to 31 months, 2.5 years, basically, that Lucy Connolly got for a tweet that she wrote on the day of the Southport attacks. It's a nasty tweet, it's horrible, and she ended it with, if that makes me racist, so be it. Well, courts decided it did. Her own solicitor advised her, I think very unwisely, to plead guilty to inciting racial hatred. She got a massive sentence, far more actually than some people who actually took part in riots for apparently inciting the chance of there being riots. No evidence that she did. When Boris Johnson says that he thinks that in some way it makes us turning us into a police state, is it true, and did it just start under Keir Starmer?
I mean, I think it's got worse under Keir Starmer. Of course, non-crime hate incidents were brought in by the Conservatives. We've got to confess that. The question is how they're now being applied. And again, it gets a bit nuanced here. So I think it's easy to say, let's not have non-crime hate incidents. And I certainly don't think that we should have cops but kicking in your door to check what's on your bookshelf to see whether you're reading books which are a bit too Brexity, this is all complete nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, we laugh at it. This literally happened.
Yeah, this literally happened. However, there is obviously the need somewhere. I think this is what has got out of control for the cops to take notes on people, even if it falls short of a crime, right? So if you're conscious that there's a particular, I don't know, extremist cell that appears to be operating from somewhere, and you haven't yet got the evidence to charge them or arrest them or nick them and get them off the streets, you still want to keep notes on that. I think that was what was initially intended by a non-crime hate incident, stuff that's of interest to the authorities. Yeah. But they should never be prosecuted. If you're knocking at the door and storming in and going through people's bookshelves, it's because you've got grounds to nick them. So I think Lucy Connolly is a political prisoner, basically. I think that she is suffering a longer sentence. I don't think she should have any sentence at all, but a much longer sentence than could be possibly considered proportionate by anyone.
And especially when we're constantly told our prisons are too full and people who don't commit violent crime shouldn't be behind bars. Well, it wasn't a violent crime, and therefore she shouldn't be behind bars. She's a mother, a carer, a childminder, and again, an awful lot of the stuff that we were told when the case went to court, in the reporting, other racist tweets. No, they weren't. A lot of it was complete lies. Yeah.
If we need to release prisoners early, you would think her name would be top of the list, not bottom of it. I mean, I appreciate it's more male prisons that are overcrowded than female prisons, but nevertheless. Absolutely.
Just some breaking news just coming in from Prime Minister's questions. We're going to be playing clips a little bit later, obviously. There's a strong hint over the winter fuel payments. Now, we know in terms of policies that have had cut through that have really angered not just Labour voters, but voters across the board, including those not even affected, not elderly themselves, but the change to winter fuel payments, taking them from being basically universal to anyone who's a pensioner to over a certain age, to just people on the lowest incomes, but leaving out millions of people on really only just scraping by incomes, losing that £300 a year to pay extra for their energy to keep themselves warm. There's been a lot of criticism of that. We know it's massive cut through with voters, a lot of anger about that. There's been a lot of talk in the last week that the government is thinking about rowing back on that. Well, Keir Starmer in the PMQs has just stated that the government wants to ensure that more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments going forward, and that the government will look at that as part of the fiscal event. We're going to have a next fiscal event from the Chancellor. But he says people are still feeling the pressure of the cost of living crisis, including pensioners. As the economy improves, we want to make sure that people feel these improvements as their lives go forward, and to make sure that more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments. Now, I mean, this would be a huge U-turn, wouldn't it? But a very welcome one.
It would be a huge U-turn, yes. My supposition is he's basically lost his backbenchers on this. So the pressure is Labour MPs coming back from their constituencies, having been on the campaign trail and saying this is just going down like a cup of cold sick, something's got to be done. I mean, they've made a complete Horlicks of this. They did not flag up in advance what their intentions were. They brought it in a tearing hurry. It was no part of their previous manifesto. The simpler thing to do, if they wanted to pivot to a completely different policy that might be seen as something approaching fair and equitable, is get rid of the winter fuel allowance entirely, but wrap it into the state pension. Exactly. So whatever your state pension goes up, whatever it would be, I'm doing the maths in my head, £6 a week or something. And then those who are high earners will be paying higher rates of income tax on that. And those who are low earners will be paying little or no income tax on it. So you get that ability to,
target the money
from the rich.
Look, I've always thought it a bit crazy that that people like my parents who could perfectly easy to put the heating on, are getting extra money to pay for their heating bill. But one of the reasons why this policy was universal has always been because it's actually the cost of means testing it. It actually costs more than the money you're saving, and those people have already paid a load of tax anyway. But as you say, just to add it on, just simply add it on to the pension.
The means testing is the income tax rates.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
The means testing.
That is the means testing. And when we talked about the next fiscal event, and again, this is the sort of thing that this lot talk about. What does that mean? We're looking at the spending review, which the Chancellor is going to be expected next month in June. So there'll just before a year in Labour in office. Now, he's talking about as things improve, But people are not feeling that things are improving. We've got the latest inflation figures, 3.5%. It was just over 2% when Labour came in just 10 months ago. We know this is down to energy bills, water bills, the council tax bills, all going up. Food inflation still continuing, certainly above that 3 percentage point mark. All of the things that people don't have a choice about are going up. Their discretionary spending is also going up, but they've got a choice at least of, well, OK, I won't go out and eat in a restaurant. I won't go and do that journey or whatever. But actually, a lot of the bills that are hitting people in their pockets on low and average incomes, those are going up. No one is feeling better off right now.
Exactly. This term, as the economy improves,
Yeah.
I mean, which planet and which economy is the Prime Minister talking about? GDP per capita is not going up. It's, if anything, probably nudging down slightly. So on average, the absolute bog standard average median person in Britain is actually getting poorer, not richer. That's the fact of the matter. I mean, I think with regard to these fiscal events, Julia, it's incumbent on all of us, commentators, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on. We do have to get government spending down quite enormously. It is out of control, it is unsustainable, and at some point we'll go pop, because we are spending more money than we can possibly bring in tax. We are taxing the economy to the absolute limits. So I think there is a serious discussion to be had that, if you don't want to bear down on the winter fuel allowance, if you don't like the farmers' tax, fine. I don't like either of the policies there. But it's incumbent upon us to find other savings then, because we are going to have to reduce government expenditure by many tens of billions. And if you don't want to cut X or Y or Z, I think you need to come forward with some plans to cut A, B or C. You've already just said you want the defence budget to go up.
Yeah. Something else has got to go down.
More savings.
But this is the interesting thing. I mean, certainly Labour Party has been sort of up in arms about a lot of the cuts that Keir Starmer has made, and he's talked about making cuts in the welfare bill. I don't think anything's going to happen there. I think there's going to be no stick that's actually going to encourage a lot of people who are currently, let's face it, swinging the lead to get back to work. But Angela Rayner apparently has got some ideas. She's probably got as much experience in trading as an economist as the Chancellor. She's the Deputy Prime Minister, of course. She has proposed, in a secret memo sent to Rach Reeves, but has been mysteriously leaked to the Telegraph, she proposed 8 different tax increases. All of them basically are aimed at tackling, raising tax for business and higher earners more than they already are at. Reckoned it was raised £3 to £4 billion a year. Again, doesn't really touch the sides of the problem we're in financially. This is the equivalent of someone going, oh, I've got no money, I'm going to lose my home, but I'll stop buying a latte on a Monday morning. That's not really going to help, is it? But basically, she apparently is, according to allies of the Deputy Prime Minister, she's become increasingly exasperated, as have other members of the Cabinet and MPs, by having to publicly defend Treasury spending cuts, and they're pushing back in private. Now, these policies tackling, those with big savings, pensioners, business owners getting directors of companies, they've started themselves getting dividends in terms of their payments tax at a lower rate, all of these sort of things, bank tax and everything. She's basically saying put it up. Now, this is Corbynista levels of extra taxation, but it's going to be very popular with Labour backbenchers, isn't it?
Well, it might be, but it wouldn't work. I mean, I thought I was told loud and clear by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor that growth is our number one priority. We're going to be laser focused on growth, I was told. None of these 8 proposals from Angela Rayner will do anything to enhance growth. They will all dampen growth.
Yeah.
So one way out of the hole that we're in, I think you would need to do more and would need to find spending reductions anyway, is that you really are serious about bringing growth to the economy. And I'm afraid that means encouraging millionaires, not fleecing them. I'm afraid that
they are being encouraged. They're encouraged to leave the country at the moment. We're losing them at a massive rate.
Exactly right. So all of these, I think we could get another billion here or 200 million there or some extra change down the sofa somewhere else. Always ignores on these sort of leftist predictions that there are any changes in behaviour as a consequence of the policies. Yeah. We've already got millionaires fleeing Britain at a faster rate than any other country in the world, bar China. Yeah. And we are hugely reliant on our millionaires to pay tax bills. Yeah. If they flee, you've got to up tax on the people who are next down the line.
I mean, that's the thing, and people just simply won't accept it. And again, we know what happens. We're told they won't leave. I know people personally who left the country when taxes went up. I know people who then, left France when taxes went up there. France went all on 70% tax. wealthy people literally left the country within weeks. It's
and it's not just that, Julia, though. I mean, people that, and it's quite an extreme thing to do, or a big step to leave the country. But there are lots more mild ways that people will change their way. Retire early.
Yeah, it's not worth their while because so much is being taken.
In my late 50s rather than my mid 60s because it's not worth paying this tax bill. Well, that's a colossal amount of money if rich, affluent, successful high earners do that. So if you're laser focused on growth, you've got to be relaxed about people getting legitimately rich and setting up companies and getting decent dividends from companies that succeed.
But also, by the way, these people getting rich from their own hard work and endeavour, selling us goods and services and employing people to do so, who also pay tax, but selling us goods and services that we want to buy.
Exactly right.
It's a mind-blowing idea, isn't it? Can I just run one thing as well? Of course, we do know we have a problem in this country with a lot of young people, 1 million young people who are not in education, employment or training. We need to get more of those back to work. A lot of them claiming they've got anxiety and goodness knows what any different day of the week. But we know that the solution from Labour government and Tory government for the last, 20, 30 years has been, let's just import a load of people from abroad, whether it's from the EU or since the EU, let's just import people from Pakistan or India or elsewhere. But we know that the Labour Party is part of this big reset deal that was announced on Monday, where it basically just gave away an awful lot of the benefits of Brexit. Labour want to have a youth mobility scheme. They're going to call it something different, so it doesn't look like it's a youth mobility scheme, but it basically could be capped at, we're told, 100,000 people a year. Not quite sure how long they'd be able to be here, be 18 to 30-year-olds. The EU would like those people to be able to bring their families in. What are the chances that this youth mobility scheme, whatever it's called, youth experience scheme or whatever, is actually going to happen, and that the British people will be happy or unhappy about it?
I suspect it will happen, and I suspect the British people will be unhappy about it. I mean, what's extraordinary about this general reset and unravelling of Brexit by the Prime Minister is it was only 3 weeks ago when his response to the local election results in the Runcorn by-election was, I've listened. Well, if he listened, he didn't hear. He's completely tone deaf, I think, to British people's concerns about immigration. And look, I don't want to pull up the drawbridge. We do need people entering and leaving different countries. That's the general turnover of the labour market. But once you dig down into the details here, right, can they come in with their dependents? Are they going to, if they wish to come and study at university, will they get the preferential British rates subsidised by the British taxpayer? Or will they be paying 3 or 4 times that, which is what American students or Chinese students need to pay? How are we going to ensure these people leave? What are we going to do to them if they don't leave on time? What will their eligibility be for benefits? I mean, the list of questions goes on and on and on. And I'm afraid the government's approach to it is just to wish those questions away. You've got to answer all of those.
I think you're just being heinous, far right, and probably racist. I think that was the summary of James Mathieson, our former Labour Party. No, but I think that's what they think. These are all legitimate, reasonable questions the British public have been asking. You're asking on their behalf, and answer came there, none. Just don't worry your pretty little heads about it, folks. Don't worry. That's what they always say. And Mark Littlewood, always good to get your perspective on all those big stories. Thank you very much, Director of Popular Conservatism, formerly, of course, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Claire Pissell's still here. I want to get your response to what looks like a U-turn being announced by the Prime Minister at PMQs just a few moments ago. We'll get the clip of what he had to say from Peter Carball in a few moments. But he's talking about how he says people are still feeling the pressure of the cost of living crisis, including pensioners. As the economy improves, we want to make sure that people feel those improvements of their lives go forward. And he said Labour wants to make sure more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments. Now, that is a clear attempt to sort of U-turn on a policy that has been a disaster for the party.
Especially when you've also had a senior cabinet minister out doing a speech this morning, doubling down on the fact that winter fuel allowance and they were right to take it away. So
Steve Reid.
Yes, Steve Reid. But you've also had Liz Kendall giving a speech at the IPPR this morning, doubling down.
Defending the policy.
Absolutely. So they don't really know quite what they're doing. They always accuse the Tories of flip-flopping or U-turn, so they're not going to want to do the same thing. But he's going to have to explain where that money's going to come from.
All the polling shows, this is the policy that most has had cut through, that people are most angry about, and it's across the board. I think their view was, well, we need to make some money up. Quite a lot of rich pensioners. Most of them vote Tory anyway, it doesn't matter. Oh, but you know what? They've got families.
Yeah.
And it turns out people are worried about it. And also, again, it didn't just hit well-off pensioners who didn't need it. It hit millions of pensioners who are just just getting by, just above that cusp for getting pensioner credit. Well, we'll talk about that. Peter Carp coming up very soon. Get your thoughts on that. Lots of calls coming in on all the topics we're talking about, in particular British culture. A lot of you still quite het up about what James Mathewson, former Labour Party spokesman, had to say. Do get in touch. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll get to your calls next. This is Talk.
What it does is it underlines the real problem we have with our judiciary. And you know, Kev, I've been banging on about this for ages, that it's not the European Court of Human Rights that's the problem in getting rid of asylum seekers, it's the bloody lawyers, it's the judiciary.
Yes.
And the same thing applies here. You know, my suspicion is Keir Starmer would have been a bit happier if she had had her appeal upheld.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, coming up to 12:29. Let's get straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000 before we go to our next guest. James is on the line in Surrey. James, you're among the many people who've called in, being quite annoyed by what James Mathewson had to say about British culture.
It's taken me ages to get on here with you, Julia. Fantastic show as usual.
You're very kind, sir.
I was so incensed by what that former Labour advisor, and I can see why he's former, they probably don't want him, had to say. If I could just say that I was a police officer for 30 years. After I retired, I worked for the UK Border Force as an immigration officer for 8 years. And I've also worked for the Home Office doing asylum screening, which is talking to asylum seekers and finding out why they've come here. So if perhaps you'd allow me to expand on that slightly. So James, whatever his name is just a classic example of the old saying that socialism is fine until you run out of other people's money, because that's all he, and it seems like this government, want to do, is to raise money by taxing hardworking people with savings and using that money, which is a piddly amount, to make up for the money that they're wasting on other projects. So I think everything he said was absolute complete nonsense, and he is still throwing the "you're a racist, you're a xenophobe" if you have these feelings about. Sorry, that's washed off now. It's like
I hate the fact that those words don't have any power anymore, because those are really important words, and they should be a source of damnation and shame. But we know they're meaningless the way they're used right now. In terms of, he said, what do you mean by English culture? It was about English, but in British culture, English culture. What do you think of that as meaning?
Yeah, well, to me, it's about villages, it's about communities coming together, whether, they're traditionally British, English, or they could have come from a foreign country, but they've mixed in. They've gone to our summer fairs. They've gone to the dance around the maypole. They appreciate what this country has to offer, and hopefully, by integrating, they bring something from their culture to share with us. And that's what we're missing, is that people aren't sharing. Certain demographics are hiding themselves away, and
in parallel communities.
Absolutely, and I think that's shocking.
Yeah. Listen, can I also ask you, just before I let you go, about that, what looks like a big U-turn being announced by the Prime Minister at PMQs today, talking about that he wants to ensure that more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments going forward. So it sounds like they're going to be upping the income cap or the income threshold for which people are able to still get their winter fuel payments. Do you welcome that?
Well, this is something that was never in their manifesto, I don't believe, and came as a shock. It was, I think, one of the first decisions they made was to cut the winter fuel allowance for so many people, and the Court of Public Opinion has caught up with them, and they are now trying to do a damage limitation. And I'm afraid people have seen through them. The next set of elections are going to be a disaster for the Labour government, and they thoroughly deserve it. He will go down as being the most unpopular, unprofessional, useless Prime Minister we've ever had.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, doesn't mince his words, does he? James, thank you so much. Call in again. Please love to hear more about your time as a police officer and indeed the Border Force as well. We're going to have to move on, though. Let's go to Nigel, who is in Portsmouth. Nigel, you want to take issue with James Mathewson as well.
Oh, I almost threw the radio out the van, honestly. I was so annoyed listening to him. Actually, about half an hour ago, someone else from Portsmouth, ironically, hit the nail on the head when you ask about British culture, and he said very eloquently, well, you can ask that about any country. What is the culture? But when he said queuing, that is the nail on the head. We queue patiently. I fit bathrooms, and I kind of do a bit of handyman stuff, so I see a lot of the problems. The thing is, it's not that I'm reading about it in the media. I'm seeing shoplifters all the time.
Oh, don't even.
I'm going into houses and I'm seeing people in their 20s. I'm listening to my three children are all in their 20s. Some of their peers, I'm suffering from anxiety. In that case, the government will enable you to sit at home and never do a day's work in the life. Yeah. The best thing, one lad I know particularly, I've known him since he was 11, the best thing for him would be to go and get a job in Co-op, go and get a job in the petrol station, go and get a job delivering leaflets, get out of the house every day, get up at 8 o'clock every morning, be at work.
It would be a kindness to him. It's actually cruel to allow him not to participate.
It's so cool. So just enabling people to sit at home and contribute nothing. And there are people who come to the country who, do you know what? Some of them getting a job would be absolutely brilliant. They'd have to learn English. They would have to learn English.
Well, there are a lot of people who come here to do work and work very hard. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, the work ethic, the Eastern Europeans and others. Lots of people come from, India's and China, they've got a fantastic reputation in terms of education and work ethic.
But a lot of people come here to not work. One of my customers is a GP, and she hit the nail on the head a few years ago. She saw the problems a long time before I did. And when she said, the problem we have at the moment is there are people who come to the UK from parts of the Commonwealth, and they actually understand about queuing. They come into the GP. Yes, it's frustrating. You have to wait 2 months to get an appointment. Yes, it's frustrating. You can't see. But she said there are other cultures. They come in, and their culture is you shout until you get what you like.
Yeah, it is different. And again, that all comes back.
Shout and shout.
It's about the sense of fair play. I think that's interesting. I don't think none of us should have to wait that long. But there we are. Nigel, thank you very much. I have to say, just want to mention actually, and Claire, I haven't mentioned this to you before. The other day, I think was it Tuesday? I can't remember which day it was. I was on the tube. I'm on the way home, and I'm on the way home, and I recognise this guy who gets on my tube carriage, and he's chatting to this woman. I thought, I recognise him. He's my friendly local beggar. So he's outside the supermarket most days, and he's lurching around. I mean, looks terrible, doesn't smell too good. He's got a sort of trailing sort of blanket duvet thing, and he's just asking people, can I have some money? Can I have some money? And I've spoken to him quite a few times because I know he actually has a home somewhere, and the staff have told me that they know know exactly who he is and where he lives and things. He's bothering people coming to the supermarket. But he's standing there. He is chatting away very coherently and animatedly, completely normal. Nothing at all how he talks outside the supermarket on the tube to his friend. He's got his big headphones on. He's got his smartphone. And they go to get off at Finchley Road. It's my local tube station. They go to get off at the station. And genuinely, I said to him, RADA would be proud of you, mate. That's a drama college. And he said to me, I did go to drama college. I went, well, it shows because you are a superb actor. And he recognised me because I often say hello to him. And Jen, we get off as he walks through the tube. Obviously, he goes. He doesn't pay for his tube ticket. Obviously, he just goes through behind me. He doesn't pay. I've paid for his fare, and he goes through. And then he grabs his blanket and he starts doing the walk and he starts the begging, acting. This guy literally commutes to beg. Lives completely normal, completely articulate, completely normal, and then he pretends to be off his head, and then begs, and people give him money, and it's literally a job for him. That's what he does for a living. So isn't that shameful?
It is absolutely shameful that he gets away with it.
He does get away with it. I keep saying to people, do not give this man money. He's a con artist. But if you're watching, yes, you probably are. Maybe you're not due at work yet.
Got a smartphone.
Yeah, I've got a smartphone. Hello, you know who I am. 12:37 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, we are going to be talking about Trump wanting to boost UK defence spending. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon to you. 12:39 is the time. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm pretty sure we're having some tech problems. Can't reach our next guest, but I want to talk about defence. And Claire Pistol, this is something that you and I have often spoken about. We know there's a lot of talk about upping defence spending. A lot of the talk in the Prime Minister's announcement on Monday about this EU reset was about us getting access to this €150 billion defence fund from the EU. Again, this isn't charity, by the way. I mean, this is like, they want us to pay in as well. I'm not entirely sure. It's about our defence contractors having access to that fund, as opposed to them saying, no, I don't care how good your jets are, or your bullets are, your missiles. No, we're not buying them from you. We're going to have our own. They're entitled to do that, and whether that's sensible, I do not know. But Donald Trump has weighed in. He wants the UK to boost defence spending to 3% by the end of this Parliament, 2029. He's understood to be pushing for an increase by the end of this Parliament earlier than planned. It would cost some £17+ billion a year to boost defence spending. That it's basically around the 2% mark now, isn't it? Talk about boosting it to 2.5%.
Yes.
But The key thing is it what we spend or is it what we spend it on that matters?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, actually. We haven't spent enough for quite some time, and the Conservative government is culpable for this, as just as much as the Labour government's going to be. And I think that also across Europe, you've seen with the EU, those nation states also haven't spent enough on defence because we've all been a bit lazy. We haven't had that many wars going on.
I mean, Germany's barely spent anything at all. I mean,
absolutely. And now they're in trouble for that because they are going to have to ramp up their spending with what's going on in Ukraine, with what's going on in the Middle East. Everybody's looking a little bit more specific at the needs of their nation. But I also think it's what we spend it on. And quite interestingly, Keir Starmer's great deal with the EU, she says through gritted teeth.
I don't think she meant that. Here we go, back to another British value. Sarcasm.
That we would be at the bottom of the list for any joining in with the Defence Demarcation Fund because we would just not be a priority to them.
Which is fair enough.
Absolutely. If those EU nations have paid into it longer than we have, they'll have better access to it. So it does make you wonder what it is we're paying for.
No, everything in the EU has been paid for by us for years. We're one of the net contributors all these years.
Yeah,
but the thing is, we do need to spend more. Reality is everyone is freaking out because Donald Trump could walk away, not just from the peace negotiations over Ukraine, but could walk away from Ukraine altogether. Yeah. I think he'd be wrong to do so morally. I think he'd be wrong in terms of US interests as well. But at the end of the day, I've always said I don't see why taxpayers in America should be paying for defence of Europe. I think we should be paying for our defence of Europe. We, taxpayers in America don't get, they don't get subsidised healthcare. Put it that way, And I really, really do think that we need to step up in this country. And the fact that we can't act to defend a European neighbour from the threat of Russia, I think it's a bit of a giveaway and a wake-up call. And when people say, we can't afford it, we can't not afford it.
Absolutely. When it comes to your national security, and those people in places like Ukraine do affect our national security. I think people need to remember that. Yes, it may be a couple of thousand miles away, but it makes a massive difference.
Absolutely. And again, anyone who says it's not our problem, not our war, this isn't paying enough attention. Let's go to another quick call, then we're going to take a break. Then we're going to be hearing from Peter Caldwell, who's our political commentator. He's been watching PMQs about that big winter fuel allowance U-turn we've here to got from the Prime Minister. Joe is in Leicester. And Joe, you're not that happy about... We're going back to James Mathewson again, the former Labour Party. Had big influence on the show, Matthew. It's not how I thought the show was going to go. Basically branding you, me, all my audio, everyone. We're all far right.
Yeah. Hi, Julia.
Hello.
I'd just like to say that I never used to vote. When it was just Labour and Conservative, I just used to give up, really.
Yeah.
And it's only recently, within the last 2 years, I've been quite concerned what's going on in the country and decided to vote again.
I've got to guess who you voted for.
I can assure that you can guess who I voted for. The only other option that can actually try and save this country and try and take us back to normality, hopefully. As I say, they are the only other option.
Does that make you far right?
Well, it obviously does in that gentleman's eyes, doesn't it? If you're concerned about your country and concerned about your children, your grandchildren, their future, how things are rapidly changing to an alarming degree.
He says it's all about skin colour. People don't like the fact that there's brown-faced people in the country.
Absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I have got no problem with people that need to come to this country as a family because they are in actual real danger. But when you're seeing boatloads of young men, it's really scary. And then when you see the government turning a blind eye to what's going on with the rape gangs, it's even more scary.
And government after government did that,
Yeah, you think to yourself, well, if they can't deal with the people that we've got living in this country, that were probably most of them born in this country, then what chance have we got when you've got people that aren't from this country with completely different values?
Absolutely. Nailed it. Joe, really appreciate your call. Thank you very much indeed. I can just say, always vote. Even if you're spoiling your ballot paper, always vote. Joe's in Leicester. Thank you for that. Final word to Claire Pearsall. We're going to have to say goodbye to you in a moment to make space for Peter Caldwell. So what do you want to say?
So much news that we've gone over, but the overwhelming sense that I've got is that your audience, you and I, are very proud to be British.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a really nice way to end something.
And feel really positive about the future of this country. I mean, I'm not positive about the direction we're in right now, but I think we can turn it around. I think we've got great decades and centuries ahead of us. I really do.
So do I. We're a nation of grit. We need to use that more.
Love it. This is why we have her on. Now you toddle off to the House of Commons.
Thank you.
And have fun there. I'm sure it's always fun there these days. Claire Pearsall, former Conservative Government Advisor. Always great to have you here. Take a quick break. Up next in the hot seat will be Peter Carbell, talk presenter, of course, and political commentator. This is Talk.
I said, did he accept, given the surrender of the fishing industry, my fishermen are furious, the surrender of sort of rulemaking, sovereignty and freedom of back back to you? I said, did he accept that he had surrendered the jobs of many of his backbench MPs at the next general election to reform? He didn't like my question, but he sort of blathered some form of answer. But that's their reality. And it was interesting to note, many of the Red Wall MPs were not in the chamber to hear the Prime Minister's statement.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 12:48 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. And let's talk about what has been going on in Prime Minister's questions. Quite a lively one, it sounds like. And certainly it looks like a major government announcement on the cards. Peter Carbell, tell us what happened.
Massive U-turn in response to a planted question from a Labour backbencher called Sarah Owen. Keir Starmer said that he's almost certainly going to U-turn on winter fuel.
It's such a big issue this has been for the last year.
That's right. It's probably going to, the U-turn is probably going to come in the spending review that's coming on the 7th of June. This has been denied by the government for quite a long time, but unsurprisingly, they've changed their mind. This is what Keir Starmer said.
There's been an awful lot of mood music about this, a lot of discomfort, not just from the public at large, but also Labour backbench MPs and within the cabinet as well. Let's have a watch and a listen of what he had to say.
As the economy improves, we want to make sure people feel those improvements in their days as their lives go forward. And that is why we want to ensure that as we go forward, more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments. As you would expect, Mr. Speaker, we will only make decisions we can afford. That is why we will look at that as part of a fiscal event.
Mr. Speaker, it's extraordinary listening to that last answer from the Prime Minister. Inflation was 2% when Conservatives left office. 2%. It's now nearly double that. When will he recognise that it's Labour's budget driving up inflation?
I think what she forgot to say was over 11% on their watch, and she didn't say a lot. I am confident those numbers will come down, Mr. Speaker. The Bank of England is confident those numbers will come down.
Well, I mean, again, quite lively. Kemi Badenoch, I suppose, rather wrong-footed, I think, perhaps, a little bit by that announcement. That will be welcomed by Labour backbenchers. Will it be a game-changer at all for Labour poll ratings and their chances of the next local elections and the general election, 28, 29, whenever it is? Because isn't a lot of the damage already done?
Yes, it is. And you look at how far Labour are down. They're second to Reform UK. You've got the Lib Dems in third. Kemi Badenoch's Conservatives are just at 16% in the most recent YouGov poll. It's really interesting when you look at how many Labour voters have moved to Reform. That's clearly happened in the local elections. It's probably going to happen in the general election as well. There was a big controversy as well at Prime Minister's questions about Angela Rayner. I haven't even got time to show it to you, Julia, about her asking for more taxes behind the scenes.
This is a memo we understand was sent in March to the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Who again, you'd think, can't they just put a post-it note on the fridge in the Downing Street fridge they pass by? But no, basically saying we want to load eight different tax rises, all basically on those rich people over there, fairly Corbynista in their feel,
Definitely,
I thought.
and certainly forgetting that people who earn over £100,000 pay 30% of the tax in this country, and a millionaire is leaving every 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot in that as well. Clearly some tensions behind the scenes. Winter fuel allowance will certainly be one of those, and Kemi Badenoch, I think, rescued her performance a little bit by being a bit performative in this next clip, saying, asking Labour MPs for a show of hands in terms of whether they actually wanted the winter fuel allowance to come down.
I love this. Let's have a watch and a listen.
He promised to protect pensioners, but his winter fuel cut has driven thousands into hardship. Yeah. His MPs hate this. He can't see them, but they all look sick just hearing what it is he's going to do. Yes. So let's wait until... Oh, yes, they're laughing. They're laughing. They are laughing just as they laughed at the budget. Hands up who here wanted winter fuel cuts. Hands up. Not a single one of them. Not a single one of them. The fact of the matter is, this Prime Minister is destroying them. They need to look at what they are doing to the country. The truth is, we all know that it's this Prime Minister, this Labour government, and their policies that are shafting the country, isn't it?
Yeah. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, they look in pretty good form to me, and there's lots of them. Mr. Speaker, she talks about business confidence. Yesterday I didn't have time to read out the list of all the businesses that have come out in support of our EU deal.
I thought that was a little bit unsure-footed by Keir Starmer there. I mean, that was quite a fairly strong attack. The interesting thing with Keir Starmer is we've had these big announcements on, things like winter fuel allowance, from the Chancellor. But, at the end of the day, you're the Prime Minister. You're the First Lord of the Treasury.
That's it.
On immigration last week, on the EU, he constantly seems to be really, foreign aid last year as well, really upsetting his backbenchers, the left of his party, but never quite pleasing anyone to the right of him.
And there is a big question, as you correctly identify, Julia. The immigration stuff was huge last week. There was loads of it. That certainly upset many on the left. Now he's upsetting people on the right of his party as well. Where is he actually going? Is the ground narrowing for him? The Lib Dems doing relatively well. Reform UK doing very well. There are lots of questions about what does Keir Starmer actually believe, and who is he trying to appeal to?
I know he believes in absolutely nothing other than no borders. I know that for sure. But you mentioned that poll, that YouGov poll. Reform at 29%. This is now becoming consistent, that they are going up and they maintain their leads, and 22% for Labour. That is a massive fall from just under 34% they got in the last election. It's just 10 months away as well. They should be riding high right now. And of course, we saw them lose that Runcorn by-election. And they didn't lose too many seats in the local elections because they weren't fighting many. The Liberal Democrats at third place at 17%.
They'll be delighted with that.
Absolutely.
Look, it's within the margin of error with the Conservatives at 16%.
But that is very definite. At the end of the day, we've got Keir Starmer is on the ropes, but Kemi Badenoch is also on the ropes massively as well, isn't she?
What we've seen in the last not even a year since the July the 4th election is both the Conservatives and Labour going down by about 10 points each in the polls. The beneficiaries of that, a little bit the Lib Dems, massively Reform UK, and we've seen that borne out in the local elections.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know you've got a clip of a former Reform UK
We'll come to...
No, he's a current Reform UK.
We'll come to Rupert Lowe in a second, but actually, Lee Anderson is our next clip.
Right.
He asked a question about immigration. Keir Starmer's answer, even by Keir Starmer's standards, I think we've got to admit that this was quite funny about Nigel Farage's absence at the moment.
Oh, right, yes. He was on holiday in France. The man was campaigning during the local election. Let them... You know, I will never criticise anyone for taking a holiday. This is Reform UK MP Lee Anderson asking his question. Let's take a watch and listen of that.
This Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, keeps telling his gullible backbenchers, those over there, that he's deported 24,000 people from this country since he came into power. But he won't say who these people are. Now, it's my guess that they are people that came on work visas, students, and they are simply overstayers. But I'm willing, Mr Speaker, to be proved wrong if you can answer one simple question. How many of these people that he's deported or failed asylum seekers that's come on small boats or on the back of lorries? Answer the question.
Prime Minister. Mr Speaker, I'm very proud that we've removed over 24,000 people. That's the highest record for nearly 10 years. We're taking other measures to get back control of our borders, including the Borders Bill. They don't want to fix this problem because it benefits them. It benefits them not to fix it. Party before country. It's very good he's standing in for the member for Clacton, I have to say. There was no sign of him yesterday at the EU. So he was the first through the E-gates somewhere to south of France. Nice work if you can get it.
That was a great gag. That was a great gag. Again, what annoys me, I go on about it even before they announced it. You can already use e-gates under the EU rules. There's nothing in this that would change it, and it's not. I mean, they're going to be doing that biometric stuff, your fingerprint, your iris. I mean, seriously, we're going to be queuing for ages. And again, we did queue before we were in. But that's a great line. But I thought it was very telling when Keir Starmer corrected himself from saying people were deported, and then he corrected himself to say removed. And actually, and that's what Lee Anderson was saying. Answer the question. That's what that's about. Is actually a lot of the time.
How many actual failed asylum seekers?
And it's often voluntary removals, and people get paid. They can get up to $3,000 to basically get out, thrown out of the country.
All those people should have left anyway. They shouldn't be here in the first place.
Well, look, let's go to the final clip, because this is the former Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe. What did he ask?
Asking about Lucy Connolly, and of course the Prime Minister, former lawyer himself, had to answer.
OK, let's have a watch and listen.
Does the Prime Minister agree that imprisoning Lucy Connolly, a young mother with a 12-year-old daughter, for one foolish social media post, soon deleted, is clearly not an efficient or fair use of prison?
Mr Speaker, sentencing is a matter for our courts, and I celebrate the fact that we have independent courts in this country. I am strongly in favour of free speech. We've had free speech in this country for a very long time, and we protect it fiercely. But I'm equally against incitement to violence against other people. And I will always support the action taken by our police and courts to keep our streets and people safe.
It is fascinating that the Prime Minister keeps saying courts are independent, except, of course, he urged the courts to take a strong line back after during the Southport riot. So which is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, they act within the law which Parliament sets and the direction they get from politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that case is not going away anytime soon. Lucy Connolly is still behind bars until August or so. What did you make of Boris Johnson saying that Starmer's Britain is turning into a police state after that Court of Appeal decision?
Well, there was a very interesting tweet by a friend of mine who said, hold on a second, what about lockdowns? What about the fact that people were... Oh, yes, it was you. That's right. It was your tweet. Yes. Your tweet said everything, Julia, in regard to Boris Johnson's hypocrisy on this. I mean, he's right, but he's also being a hypocrite.
Do you know what we haven't got to? We haven't got to David Lammy totally embarrassing our nation on Israel. When you get praised by Hamas for a policy decision by the government, maybe you're not making the right policy decision. Well, there's an awful lot going through. You covered a lot of ground there, Peter Cobble. I know. When are you back on air?
4 o'clock today.
He's doing every single day. Get your little violin out. Get your little violin out. Peter Cobble having to be on air. We love having you on air. Great to have you, Julia. Thank you. Ian Collins is